Hey guys, tonight we're taking a quiet walk back in time to a world of gods, rituals, and magnificent stone cities that once floated on a lake. We're exploring the mystery of how the ancient Aztecs built their awe-inspiring temples. These structures weren't just buildings, they were gateways between the earth and the heavens, crafted by hands guided by faith, mathematics, and astonishing ingenuity. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy the kind of content that merges myth and mystery. And hey, let us know, from where are you watching tonight? What time is it for you right now? It's time now to dim the lights, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Long before the modern sprawl of Mexico City filled the valley with light and noise, there existed a world of shimmering water and drifting islands, a world the Aztecs called home. The Valley of Mexico, cradled by mountains and volcanoes, was once dominated by a vast inland lake system. From the cool, reflective waters of Lake Texcoco rose one of the most extraordinary cities in human history, Tenochtitlan. It was here, upon this unlikely landscape of marsh and mist, that the Aztec Empire would carve its place in the story of civilization. Imagine approaching the valley centuries ago. The morning air is thin but bright, carrying the distant calls of waterfowl. The mountains on all sides, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, their snow-capped peaks shimmering in the distance, stand like guardians of a sacred basin. And in the heart of that basin, floating upon the silver-blue surface of the lake, you would see Tenochtitlan, a maze of canals, temples, and markets glistening under the sun. To the arriving eye, it would seem like a dream, a city not built on land, but upon the water itself. The Aztecs, or Mexica, as they called themselves, were not originally from this valley. According to their own records and oral histories, they were once a wandering people, migrating from a semi-mythical northern land known as Aztlan. For generations, they roamed the high plateaus of central Mexico, guided by prophecies and priests, searching for a sign that would reveal where they were meant to settle. That sign, their legends tell, was to be an eagle perched upon a cactus, devouring a serpent, a vision of divine destiny. When the Mexica arrived in the Valley of Mexico around the year 1325, they found that the most fertile lands were already claimed by other powerful city-states, Texcoco, Tlacopan, and others who looked down upon these rough, nomadic newcomers. The Mexica were forced to settle in the marshy edges of Lake Texcoco, a place few others wanted. It was there, upon a cluster of small islands, that they claimed to have seen their sacred sign, the eagle, the cactus, and the serpent. Taking it as divine instruction, they began to build their city. From its very beginning, Tenochtitlan was a marvel of adaptation and human willpower. The Mexica didn't conquer the environment. They learned to coexist with it, to bend water and soil to their vision. They drove wooden stakes into the lake bed, layering mud and reeds to create artificial islands called chinampas. These floating gardens became the foundation of their city and their food supply. Around them, causeways connected the islands to the mainland, and canals served as roads for canoes that glided silently beneath bridges. By the 15th century, Tenochtitlan had grown into one of the largest and most advanced cities in the world. Chroniclers who arrived with the Spanish later described it as more beautiful and orderly than anything in Europe at the time. It was a city of wide avenues and bustling markets, aqueducts that carried fresh water from distant springs, and enormous temples that rose like mountains of stone and paint. Everything was arranged with mathematical precision, following sacred geometries that reflected the Aztec understanding of the cosmos. At the city's center stood the ceremonial precinct, a vast walled area that contained the Templo Mayor, or Great Temple. This temple would become the heart of Aztec religious and political life. Every road in Tenochtitlan led toward it. Every festival, every coronation, and every sacrifice took place within its shadow. The temple's twin staircases rose high into the sky, symbolizing the dual nature of existence, the eternal struggle between creation and destruction, between the gods of rain and war, of life and death. But to understand how the Aztecs built their temples, one must first understand the world they inhabited. The Valley of Mexico was not merely a backdrop, it was a living participant in their civilization. The Aztecs believed the valley was sacred, formed in the aftermath of cosmic battles between gods. The surrounding mountains were divine beings themselves, each embodying elemental forces. Water from the lakes represented fertility and life, while the dry land was associated with death and rebirth. To the Aztecs, building a temple was not simply an act of engineering, it was a continuation of the divine creation of the world. And yet, beneath this spiritual vision lay an astonishing mastery of practical knowledge. The Mexica were expert hydrologists, agriculturalists, and urban planners. They constructed dikes to control the salinity of the lake's water, separating fresh water from brackish zones. They devised drainage systems to prevent flooding and built causeways that could be dismantled in times of war to defend the city. Their marketplaces, such as the Great Market of Tlatelolco, could host tens of thousands of people each day, trading everything from obsidian tools to cacao beans and exotic feathers. The scale of Tenochtitlan's organization reflected the precision of its builders. Streets were laid out in a grid pattern, divided into four main districts, mirroring the Aztec vision of the universe divided into four directions. Each district contained temples, schools, and public spaces. The city functioned with remarkable efficiency, sustained by tribute from conquered regions and by the ingenuity of its people. Despite being built on water, it was self-sufficient, clean, and vibrant, a place where architecture and nature existed in harmony. The people themselves lived by a deep code of order and devotion. From childhood, citizens were taught discipline, humility, and the importance of community. Education was universal, and even commoners were instructed in crafts, farming, and the rituals of daily life. Music, poetry, and art were not luxuries, they were necessities, reflections of the divine order that governed all things. To build a temple was not just to construct a monument, it was to express that cosmic harmony in stone. Everywhere in the city, one could hear the rhythm of hammers, the scraping of chisels on stone, and the distant chanting of priests. The air was filled with incense and the aroma of flowers. The people of Tenochtitlan were constantly building, repairing, expanding, each new structure a gesture of devotion. The temples rose not only as places of worship, but as statements of identity, as if the city itself were reaching toward the gods. What made this civilization remarkable was its balance of beauty and purpose. The Aztecs understood that their world was fragile, that the sun itself depended on their rituals and their faith. Their architecture reflected that belief. Monuments that were as much spiritual engines as physical structures. The temples stood as anchors in a universe always teetering between chaos and order. By the dawn of the 16th century, Tenochtitlan had become a living masterpiece. Its population exceeded 200,000, rivaling the great cities of Europe and Asia. And at its heart, the great temple loomed, both terrifying and magnificent, a symbol of an empire that had risen against all odds from the waters of a lake. The empire among the lakes was not just a place, it was an achievement of will, vision, and devotion. The Aztecs transformed a marsh into a metropolis, a world of mud and reeds into a jewel of stone and paint. And though the centuries have buried much of what they built, the echoes of that world still linger beneath modern Mexico City, in the bones of the earth and the stories that survive. The story of how they built their temples begins here, among the water, the wind, and the whispering mountains of the Valley of Mexico. A civilization that defied its environment, guided by faith, by mathematics, and by the timeless desire to reach for the heavens. At the center of the Aztec world stood not merely a building, but a symbol of divine order, the Templo Mayor, or Great Temple. This immense structure dominated the skyline of Tenochtitlan, rising high above the surrounding plazas and canals, its twin sanctuaries gleaming with color and gold leaf that caught the morning light. It was here, in the sacred precinct, that heaven met earth. Everything in the Aztec Empire, from politics to religion, revolved around this single monumental axis. To understand the heart of Tenochtitlan is to understand how deeply the Aztecs wove spirituality into the fabric of their daily lives. The Great Temple was more than a religious site. It was the embodiment of the cosmos itself. The Aztecs believed the universe was divided into multiple realms, 13 heavens above, 9 underworlds below, and the earthly plane in between. The temple's towering height symbolized the vertical bridge that connected these layers, a sacred staircase between the world of men and the world of gods. The location of the Templo Mayor was no accident. The entire city of Tenochtitlan was designed around it. At its base, 4 great causeways extended outward in perfect symmetry, corresponding to the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. Each direction held cosmic meaning. The east represented rebirth and the rising sun. The west symbolized death and descent. The north was the land of ancestors, and the south the domain of youth and vitality. From the temple's summit, priests could look across these causeways and see the city unfold like a cosmic map, canals shimmering like veins of light, gardens blooming on the water, and mountains framing the horizon like the edges of a divine painting. Within the ceremonial precinct, the air was thick with incense, the scent of copal resin drifting over the crowds that gathered for rituals. The precinct was enclosed by a massive wall known as the Coatepantli, or Serpent Wall, carved with intertwining serpents that seemed to coil protectively around the sacred ground. Inside, there were more than 70 structures, smaller temples, schools for priests, ball courts, and altars, but all eyes were drawn to the great temple at the center. The Templo Mayor was constructed in stages over the centuries, with each Aztec ruler expanding and refurbishing it to mark his reign. Archaeological evidence shows at least 7 distinct construction phases, each layer built directly over the previous one, like the rings of a tree, recording the passage of time. With every new layer, the temple grew taller and grander, its surface covered with brightly colored plaster, its stairways polished smooth by the feet of thousands of worshippers. At the top of the pyramid stood 2 sanctuaries, side by side, each dedicated to one of the Aztecs' most important gods. On the right stood the shrine of Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, patron deity of the Mexica people. His temple was painted red, symbolizing blood, fire, and the energy of life. On the left stood the shrine of Tlaloc, the god of rain, fertility, and agriculture, whose temple was painted in shades of blue and green, representing water and renewal. Together, these twin shrines represented the dual forces that governed existence: destruction and creation, drought and fertility, death and rebirth. The Aztecs saw these opposites not as enemies, but as complements. The harmony between them ensured the continuation of the world. The Templo Mayor, therefore, was a physical expression of cosmic balance. Every year, rituals were performed to honor both deities. Offerings of hearts and blood to Huitzilopochtli to keep the sun alive, and ceremonies of water, flowers, and maize to Tlaloc to ensure the rain would fall. In the minds of the Aztecs, these sacrifices were not cruel acts, but sacred obligations, exchanges of energy that sustained the rhythm of the universe. The architecture itself reinforced this philosophy. The temple's dual staircases rose steeply from the plaza below, each leading to one of the 2 shrines. The steps were narrow and sharp, forcing climbers to move carefully and deliberately, as if ascending into another realm. The alignment of the temple was precise. On certain days of the year, particularly the spring equinox, the rising sun would appear exactly between the 2 sanctuaries, casting golden light over both at once. To the Aztecs, this moment symbolized the unity of fire and water, of sun and rain, the eternal equilibrium of life. From below, the sight must have been overwhelming. Imagine standing in the great plaza, surrounded by the hum of thousands of voices, the beating of drums echoing against the stone, and the flicker of torches reflected on polished obsidian walls. The great temple towered above, its painted surface gleaming under the sky. At its base stood massive stone sculptures, serpents, jaguars, and eagles, guardians of the divine. One of the most striking was the Coyolxauhqui stone, depicting the dismembered moon goddess, whose myth was tied to the temple's very creation. According to legend, the god Huitzilopochtli was born fully armed atop a sacred mountain and immediately defeated his rebellious siblings, casting his sister Coyolxauhqui down the slope. The Templo Mayor itself symbolized that mountain, Coatepec, the Serpent Hill, and each ritual reenactment of the myth reaffirmed the power of the sun over darkness. The heart of Tenochtitlan pulsed with ceremony. Festivals were frequent and elaborate, often lasting days or even weeks. Drums and conch shells marked the hours, and the air shimmered with color and movement. Priests in feathered cloaks ascended the steps, carrying offerings of flowers, jade, and obsidian knives. Below, dancers moved in circular patterns, their movements synchronized to the rhythm of the drums. a living expression of cosmic cycles. The people gathered not only to witness, but to participate in the eternal drama of creation and renewal. But beyond its spiritual significance, the Templo Mayor also served as the center of Aztec political power. The rulers of Tenochtitlan, the Hui Tlatoani, or Great Speaker, governed the empire from palaces located nearby. Every major decision, from warfare to diplomacy, was connected to the rituals performed at the temple. Victories in battle were celebrated there. The spoils of war were offered to the gods. The temple thus represented both the heart of faith and the throne of authority, a fusion of religion and state that gave the empire its unity and strength. The plaza around the temple was equally vital. It was the largest open space in the city, capable of holding tens of thousands of people. On ordinary days, it served as a marketplace and gathering spot. On holy days, it transformed into a vast stage for ritual performance. From the rooftops of nearby buildings, musicians played flutes and drums, while the city below shimmered in movement and sound. At night, when torches lined the staircases and incense curled upward into the darkness, the temple seemed to float above the city like a living flame. For the Aztecs, Tenochtitlan's heart was not just physical, it was metaphysical. It represented the axis mundi, the central point of the world, the place where the divine energies of the universe converged. They believed that when the gods created the fifth and current world, they did so from this very spot. The temple marked the center of all existence, the place where time and space met, and from which life radiated outward in all directions. Every element of the great temple, its design, its alignment, its rituals, reflected the Aztec worldview. It was a place where architecture, religion, astronomy, and politics fused into one seamless reality. And though centuries have passed, and much of the original temple lies in ruins beneath modern streets, its essence remains. When archaeologists uncovered its foundations in the late 20th century, they found layer upon layer of devotion, offerings of jade, seashells, animal bones, and even human remains, each placed there by hands that believed they were sustaining the universe itself. The heart of Tenochtitlan was more than a center of empire. It was the beating pulse of a civilization that saw no divide between the material and the divine. Every stone, every color, every ritual act was part of a grand conversation with the cosmos. The Templo Mayor stood as a reminder that, in the eyes of the Aztecs, the gods did not dwell in distant heavens. They lived among them, in the water, the air, the earth, and in the sacred heart of their city. To the Aztecs, architecture was not a matter of simple utility or beauty. It was a divine language, a way to translate the structure of the cosmos into stone and mortar. Every temple, every plaza, every stairway and sculpture was infused with symbolic purpose. The city itself was conceived as a living model of the universe, a cosmic diagram where gods and humans coexisted in precise alignment. Nowhere was this principle more visible than in the sacred design of the Templo Mayor and the temples that surrounded it. The Aztec worldview rested upon the concept of order emerging from chaos. They believed that the universe had been created and destroyed multiple times. Four previous worlds, or suns, had existed before the current one, each ending in cataclysm. The fifth sun, the world in which they lived, was sustained only through balance, sacrifice, and harmony between opposing forces. Their architecture mirrored this cosmic duality: light and darkness, fire and water, life and death, all expressed through symmetry and spatial orientation. When Aztec architects began designing a temple, they did not simply choose a plot of land and begin stacking stones. Instead, priests and astronomers first determined the axis of construction, the sacred line connecting the temple to the heavens. Using careful observation of celestial bodies, they noted the path of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the position of the Venus, which held great significance in Aztec mythology as the morning and evening star. These observations guided the temple's alignment. The Templo Mayor, for instance, was precisely oriented so that on the spring equinox, the rising sun appeared in the gap between the twin sanctuaries of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. At that moment, sunlight would bathe both shrines equally, a powerful manifestation of cosmic unity between the forces of war and fertility. This was not an accident of engineering, it was a declaration of belief, carved into the very geometry of the city. The Aztecs saw space as sacred. The center of Tenochtitlan, where the Templo Mayor stood, was the navel of the universe, the point of origin from which the four cardinal directions extended. Each direction was not merely a compass point, but a living domain ruled by specific gods, colors, and elements. The east, Tlahuistlampa, was red and associated with the rising sun and beginnings. The west, Tzihutlampa, was white, connected to the setting sun and endings. The north, Mictlampa, was black, the realm of death and the underworld. And the south, Huitztlampa, was blue, symbolizing youth and growth. The temple's dual stairways rose between these symbolic quadrants, serving as a bridge between all cosmic realms. The base of each temple often represented the earthly plane, decorated with carvings of serpents, frogs, or water motifs to symbolize life emerging from the ground. As one ascended the steep stairs, each level corresponded to a higher plane of existence, leading ultimately to the shrines at the top, the dwelling place of the gods. The verticality of the temples was deliberate. To climb them was to retrace the mythical ascent toward divinity. The Aztecs saw their pyramids as man-made mountains, echoing the sacred peaks that surrounded their valley, such as Mount Tlaloc and Popocatépetl. In Aztec mythology, mountains were the source of life-giving water and the resting places of the gods. By shaping their temples into artificial mountains, the Aztecs were recreating the cosmic geography of creation itself. The Templo Mayor was often described as the earthly representation of Coatepec, the Serpent Hill, where the sun god Huitzilopochtli was born and triumphed over darkness. Every ritual performed there reenacted this mythic event, ensuring that the cosmic order remained intact. The sacred design extended beyond the temple itself into the entire city. The layout of Tenochtitlan was planned according to the same principles of symmetry and alignment. The city was divided into four great districts, each representing one of the cardinal directions. These districts were further divided into smaller neighborhoods, or calpulli, each with its own temple, schools, and communal spaces. Canals flowed through these districts like veins, connecting the people to the city's spiritual heart. Even the markets and causeways were arranged in harmony with the temple's orientation, turning the city into a vast ceremonial stage. To walk through Tenochtitlan was to walk through a sacred landscape. Every road led toward the Templo Mayor. Every building reflected a fragment of cosmic truth, from the humblest hut to the grandest shrine. The city's architecture was bound by the same logic, balance, order, and devotion. The Aztecs believed that as long as their world remained aligned with the heavens, the sun would continue to rise and life would endure. The design principles extended to the proportions of the temples as well. The Aztecs employed advanced mathematics, using ratios and modular measurements based on the human body. Scholars believe they used a standard unit known as the metel, roughly equivalent to a forearm's length. These measurements ensured not only precision, but also a sense of harmony. The height of a pyramid, the width of a stairway, the distance between sanctuaries, all were calculated to create equilibrium, both visually and spiritually. And yet, beyond the technical mastery, the Aztecs imbued their temples with a deep symbolic storytelling. Carvings, murals, and sculptures told the myths of their gods, tales of creation, destruction, and rebirth. The walls of the Templo Mayor, for instance, were adorned with serpents representing Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of wind and knowledge. The temple's platforms often featured depictions of skulls, eagles, and jaguars, animals that embodied divine forces. Every element was a visual narrative, turning the temple into a living text written in stone. The color palette of Aztec architecture also held cosmic meaning. The temples were painted with mineral pigments in striking hues: turquoise blues, blood reds, sunlit yellows, and chalk whites. Each color corresponded to deities and directions: blue for Tlaloc and the south, red for Huitzilopochtli and the east, black for the underworld to the north, and white for the west. From afar, the city must have gleamed like a rainbow of divine energy, shimmering on the surface of the lake. The soundscape of the temple precinct was equally intentional. Ceremonial drums, conch shells, and flutes were used not only for ritual, but to create resonance within the stone structures. The acoustics of the stairways and courtyards amplified these sounds, making them echo like thunder. When hundreds of drums beat in unison, the vibrations would travel through the plaza, merging with the hum of chanting priests and the low murmur of the gathered crowds. Sound, like architecture, became a form of worship, an invisible structure rising toward the gods. Even time itself was embedded into the sacred design. The Aztecs measured time through their calendars, particularly the Tonalpohualli, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Xiuhpohualli, a 365-day solar calendar. These cycles dictated when temples were to be constructed, rebuilt, or rededicated. The very act of building was seen as a renewal of time, a way to ensure the continued motion of the cosmos. The Templo Mayor, therefore, was not a static monument. It was a living structure, constantly growing and transforming with each generation. Each new layer, added by a ruler, symbolized not only political expansion, but also the renewal of cosmic order. As the temple rose, so too did the empire's destiny, anchored to the belief that architecture could sustain the universe. Through the sacred design of their temples, the Aztecs demonstrated a profound truth: that architecture can be both science and prayer, geometry and mythology. They built not just to inhabit space, but to define existence. Each stone, Each measurement, each color, was a note in the grand symphony of creation, an echo of their conviction that the divine could be shaped, measured, and touched. To this day, when one stands amid the ruins of the Templo Mayor, surrounded by the chaos of modern Mexico City, there is still a sense of that alignment, a lingering order in the air. The sacred design endures, whispering through the centuries, reminding us that for the Aztecs, every structure was a mirror of the cosmos, and to build was to participate in the eternal act of creation. The story of an Aztec temple began long before the first stone was lifted, long before the chants of builders echoed through the valley, or the smell of incense drifted over the water. The true beginning lay in the choosing of the site, a decision that was as much divine revelation as human judgment. For the Aztecs, location was destiny. The place where a temple rose was never random, never mere convenience. It was sacred geography, carefully chosen through ritual, vision, and astronomical precision. In Aztec cosmology, the earth was not inert matter. It was alive, pulsing with divine energy. The ground itself was a being, the goddess Tlaltecutli, the devourer and giver of life. To build upon her body required permission, ceremony, and balance. A temple site could not simply be selected. It had to be discovered, revealed through omens, sacred patterns, and the wisdom of priests who read the will of the gods in stars, wind, and water. The process began with the Tlamatinaime, the wise men and philosophers of the Aztec world. These were not builders in the physical sense, but architects of meaning. They were joined by Tonalpoque, diviners who interpreted the sacred calendar, and Tlamakasque, priests devoted to the service of the gods. Together, they formed the spiritual council that determined where a new temple would rise. The first step was observation of the land, the light, and the heavens. Aztec astronomers were remarkably precise. They studied the cycles of the sun, the moon, and Venus, whose appearance as the morning and evening star was believed to signal divine favor or warning. Using simple tools, sighting rods, cords, and shadows, they could trace the path of celestial bodies across the horizon. The chosen site would have to align with key astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, and zenithal passages of the sun. These alignments were not mere decoration. They ensured that the temple became part of the cosmic clock, a mechanism through which time itself was measured. The Aztecs believed that certain natural features carried spiritual resonance. Mountains, springs, caves, and intersections of rivers were all considered sacred places. Teotlali, divine land. Mountains in particular held immense importance, for they were seen as the dwelling places of gods and the sources of rain. When a temple was constructed, it often imitated the nearest sacred mountain, becoming its man-made counterpart. The Templo Mayor, for instance, was aligned to Mount Tlaloc in the east and the twin volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl to the south. In this way, the temple acted as a symbolic bridge between the earthly city and the celestial realm. Before construction could begin, the site had to be purified. This was not an act of engineering, but of ritual cleansing. Priests fasted, prayed, and offered sacrifices to cleanse the land of negative energies. They burned copal incense to sanctify the air, poured sacred water from gourds to bless the soil, and buried offerings shells from distant seas, precious stones, and figurines representing the gods to awaken the spirit of the earth. In some cases, human sacrifices were offered as well, their blood nourishing the ground so that the temple might rise strong and holy. One of the most fascinating aspects of Aztec site selection was their integration of environment and belief. The Aztecs did not seek to dominate nature, they sought to converse with it. If a certain place resonated with divine energy, if birds circled in unusual patterns, or if lightning struck a particular hill, it was interpreted as a sign from the gods. The decision to build in the middle of Lake Texcoco on a cluster of swampy islands seems almost impossible by modern standards, yet for the Aztecs, it was exactly where they were meant to be. Their foundational vision, the eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent, was not just a symbol, but a command from the divine. They did not choose the site. The gods chose it for them. Once the general location was determined, the priests sought cosmic confirmation through ceremony. They erected wooden poles or stone markers to track the sun's movement across the year. At dawn and dusk, they observed where the light fell. If the rays illuminated the spot in harmony with the sacred calendar, it was deemed acceptable. This practice ensured that the temple would be aligned with both time and space, the two great forces that shaped Aztec reality. The temple would not merely stand upon the earth, it would participate in the eternal cycles of creation. The orientation of temples was of critical importance. Many faced east, greeting the rising sun and symbolizing rebirth and renewal. Others faced west, embodying endings and descent into the underworld. The direction determined the temple's spiritual function. Temples to Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, faced east to capture the first light of dawn. Those dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, might face the mountains, where clouds gathered. Every direction was charged with meaning, and each temple was a reflection of the universe's fourfold structure. The geology of the chosen site also mattered. Builders sought stable ground when possible, but in the watery world of Tenochtitlan, compromise was essential. Engineers drove wooden piles deep into the soft lake bed to create foundations strong enough to bear the weight of stone pyramids. These foundations were often enhanced by volcanic rock, lime, and layers of gravel, forming a kind of floating base that could shift with the movement of the soil. Even this adaptability reflected Aztec philosophy: flexibility within order, balance within motion. In selecting a temple site, the Aztecs were also choosing a spiritual threshold, a point where the worlds of gods and humans overlapped. They called these liminal zones Tlalxico, meaning the center of the land. The Templo Mayor stood precisely on such a center, believed to be the very place where the gods had created the fifth sun. When priests ascended its steps, they were retracing that original act of creation, connecting their time to the timeless. The choosing of a site often involved omens and prophetic dreams. The high priests were believed to communicate directly with the gods during trance rituals induced by fasting, chanting, and sacred plants. They sought visions, flashes of light, the flight of birds, the cry of animals that revealed divine favor or warning. These visions guided their decisions as much as any measurement or calculation. The Aztecs believed that ignoring a divine sign could doom not only a temple, but the city itself. Once the location was chosen, and confirmed through ritual and astronomy. It was marked with the symbol of the four directions, a cross-shaped pattern etched into the ground, representing the meeting of cosmic forces. At the center of this cross, the first offering was buried, a jade bead or a human heart, symbolizing life. From that moment onward, the site was no longer ordinary ground. It had become sacred space, a living entity destined to support a link between heaven and earth. Archaeological evidence supports these practices. Beneath the foundations of the Templo Mayor and other Aztec temples, excavators have found layers of offerings, shells from both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, obsidian blades, coral, seeds, and figurines. These items came from across the empire, uniting all regions under one sacred center. Each object was placed deliberately, facing specific directions, aligned with celestial movements. The earth beneath each temple was, in a sense, a miniature universe, a coded message to the gods, sealed in stone. Choosing a location was thus an act of cosmic negotiation. It required wisdom, patience, and humility. The Aztecs did not see their temples as creations of human genius alone, but as collaborations with divine will. To build in the wrong place was unthinkable. To build in the right one was to ensure the continuation of the world. When the priests finally declared the site chosen, the people gathered in celebration. Drums thundered across the lake, and canoes filled the water as citizens came to witness the sacred announcement. The spot where the temple would rise was adorned with flowers and banners. Children released butterflies into the air, symbolizing the souls of warriors ascending to the sun. The people understood that a new center of power and faith was about to emerge, and that the gods themselves had marked the ground. Thus, the choosing of the location was not the first step in construction. It was the first act of creation. It was the moment when the Aztecs aligned their earthly realm with the heavens above, transforming landscape into sacred geometry. Every temple that rose thereafter, every block of stone, every carved serpent, every stairway climbing toward the sky would be an extension of that original choice. That moment when humanity and divinity met upon the same patch of earth. If you could stand where the first Aztec builders once stood, the sound would come first. The steady rhythm of poles striking mud, the swish of reeds, the murmuring splash of water lapping against stakes. You would smell wet earth mixed with the faint scent of smoke from cooking fires drifting over the canals. The surface beneath your feet would shift slightly with each step, neither solid ground nor open water, but something in between. This was the place where the Mexica chose to build the heart of their empire, the center of a lake. To modernize, it seems impossible. How could anyone raise a stone temple that soared over 30 meters high on land that was, in truth, not land at all? But the Aztecs were masters of adaptation. What others saw as limitation, they saw as opportunity. The watery world of Lake Texcoco became their greatest canvas, and they learned to shape it through ingenuity, patience, and faith. The ground beneath Tenochtitlan was composed of soft clay and silt, deposits built up over millennia from volcanic erosion and ancient floods. The lake's bed was treacherous. It shifted with every rainfall and sank slowly under its own weight. To construct on such soil required more than ordinary skill. It demanded the creation of a new kind of foundation, one that could float and breathe with the water, and that is exactly what the Aztecs achieved. The process began with staking and gridding. Builders, often teams of skilled laborers, supervised by engineers and priests, drove long wooden piles deep into the lake bed. These piles were made from sturdy native trees like ahuehuete, the Montezuma cypress, or tepozan, whose dense wood resisted decay even in water. Each stake was hammered down with rhythmic precision, forming a square or rectangular grid. Within this framework, horizontal beams were laid across to create a woven platform. It was an architecture of interlocking tension, flexible yet firm, moving with the lake rather than against it. Next came the layering of materials. The Aztecs filled the framework with alternating layers of volcanic rock, gravel, reeds, and packed earth. Each layer served a purpose. The stones provided weight and drainage, the reeds prevented erosion, and the earth sealed the structure. This technique, similar in principle to modern pile foundations, distributed weight evenly and prevented the heavy temples above from sinking too deeply. The process required immense manpower and organization, often involving thousands of workers laboring in shifts. One can imagine the scene: the water alive with canoes ferrying material from distant shores. Volcanic stones were transported from quarries around the valley, some as far as 20 kilometers away. Mud and soil were dredged from the lake itself. Workers used baskets woven from reeds to haul the sediment, singing chants to maintain rhythm. The sound of construction echoed for miles across the water, mingling with the cries of herons and the hiss of wind through the reeds. The Aztecs were not only engineers, but also artists of balance. They understood that stability in such a landscape was achieved through harmony rather than resistance. Their foundations were slightly porous, allowing water to rise and fall with the seasons. Canals were deliberately built around the temple precincts to regulate pressure on the soil. When the lake swelled during heavy rains, the water level around the structures would equalize, preventing collapse. The city itself functioned like a living organism, breathing with the lake, adjusting to its moods. Central to their mastery was the use of chinampa technology, the same method that had allowed them to create fertile floating gardens. Chinampas were artificial islands made by weaving reeds into rectangular enclosures, filling them with mud, and anchoring them with willow trees whose roots knit the structure together. For temples and major buildings, this idea was adapted on a monumental scale. The entire ceremonial precinct of Tenochtitlan was, in essence, a series of reinforced chinampas bound together by stone walls and canals. Before construction of any temple began, priests performed elaborate foundation ceremonies. The ground was consecrated through offerings buried at key points of the foundation. Archaeologists have uncovered caches of obsidian blades, coral, shells, jade beads, and even miniature effigies of gods placed beneath temple floors. These offerings were not decoration. They were believed to stabilize the soul of the structure, binding it to the earth goddess Tlaltecutli and protecting it from collapse. The builders worked not just with physics, but with faith, each layer of stone accompanied by prayer. Once the foundations were firm, the first stones of the temple platforms were laid. Builders used volcanic rock, such as tezontle, a reddish porous stone that was light yet strong, ideal for upper layers. For the core structure, heavier basalt blocks provided mass and endurance. Between these layers, Lime mortar, mixed with crushed shells, and sand acted as a binding agent. The Aztecs developed a kind of proto-concrete, remarkably durable even in damp conditions. Some remnants of these foundations still survive today, hidden beneath modern Mexico City's streets. Proof of their extraordinary skill. Working in water brought constant challenges. The lake bed could shift overnight, and sections of the foundation would sink unevenly. To correct this, the Aztecs devised incremental leveling, adding or removing fill to restore balance. Wooden retaining walls were reinforced by weaving reeds and tying them with cords made from maguey fiber. Workers learned to listen to the sound of the mud. Its gurgles and sighs revealed where the earth was settling or shifting. Their understanding of the environment was intuitive and experiential, passed down through generations of builders. The foundations of Tenochtitlan's temples were not isolated efforts. They were part of a larger hydraulic system that sustained the city. Dikes controlled the mixture of salt and fresh water. Canals served both as transportation routes and as drainage channels. The Great Dike of Nezahualcóyotl, stretching more than 10 miles, regulated water levels to prevent flooding. In this engineered equilibrium, the temples stood as both spiritual and hydrological centers, the city's heart and anchor. When viewed from above, the layout of the ceremonial precinct was astonishingly geometric. The Templo Mayor stood at the axis mundi, the symbolic center of the world, surrounded by smaller temples, altars, and courtyards. Beneath it all, the foundations extended like roots into the mud, binding the sacred space to the living earth. This design mirrored the Aztec cosmological model: heaven above, the human world in the middle, and the underworld below, all connected through the temple's core. Building on water also carried symbolic meaning. The Aztecs saw water as the essence of life and fertility, but also of chaos and destruction. To raise their temples upon it was to demonstrate mastery over these forces, a declaration that order and civilization could triumph over the primordial depths. The temples, therefore, were not just built on water, they rose against it, embodying the eternal struggle between creation and dissolution. The engineering brilliance of these foundations impressed even the Spaniards who later witnessed the city. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortés's soldiers, wrote that Tenochtitlan seemed like an enchanted vision, rising from the lake like a thing of dreams. What he saw as enchantment was in truth engineering, centuries of knowledge distilled into stone, wood, and mud. Yet these foundations also carried a tragic irony. The same soft ground that had cradled the temples eventually became their undoing. After the conquest, the Spanish drained much of Lake Texcoco and built their colonial city atop the Aztec ruins. Without the balancing presence of water, the soil began to sink unevenly, and many of the ancient structures collapsed or disappeared beneath new construction. Modern Mexico City still bears the scars of that transformation, its streets slowly sinking year by year, a reminder that the lake beneath still breathes. What endures, however, is the legacy of those foundations, the ingenuity that allowed a people to build mountains upon water. The Aztecs turned the fluid instability of their world into strength, mastering a landscape that most would have fled. Every temple that rose from the lake was a testament to the idea that stability is not the absence of movement, but the harmony within it. So, when you imagine the towering pyramids of Tenochtitlan, remember what lay beneath them: thousands of wooden stakes, tons of volcanic stone, offerings to the gods, and the steady heartbeat of water moving through the earth. The temples did not merely rest upon foundations, they grew from them, nourished by the lake itself. The empire stood because its people learned the oldest lesson of all: that the earth, however fluid or fragile, can be persuaded to hold a dream if you build with understanding. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, where sunlight shimmered off the surface of the canals and the hum of daily life filled the air, the art of building was everywhere. It was in the rhythmic tap of stone against stone, the rasp of obsidian blades shaping wood, the murmur of laborers carrying loads through the city's narrow causeways. Every temple, every palace, every stone carving began not with grand architecture, but with humble materials: earth, stone, water, and the will of the people who shaped them. The Aztecs built their temples using the raw elements of their world. They did not have iron, steel, or beasts of burden to pull their loads. They had only stone, wood, and their own hands. And yet, from these seemingly simple means, they constructed structures that could rival the pyramids of Egypt or the temples of Greece in both scale and sophistication. Let's begin with the most fundamental of all: stone. The Valley of Mexico was a landscape born of fire. Volcanic eruptions over countless ages had filled the region with an extraordinary variety of stone, each type carrying its own texture, color, and purpose. The Aztecs used this geological diversity to their advantage. For the core of most temples, they turned to Tzontli, a reddish volcanic rock that was both light and porous. It could be quarried in large blocks and was easy to shape using stone tools. Despite its lightness, Tzontli provided strength and insulation, an ideal foundation for massive constructions. Beneath layers of plaster and paint, much of the great temple's body was made from this humble material. Hidden beneath its ceremonial grandeur, for the outer facings and stairs, the builders used andesite and basalt, much harder, volcanic stones, capable of holding sharp edges and intricate carvings. These gave the temples their clean lines and durability. When you picture the steep staircases of the Templo Mayor glinting in the sunlight, or the smooth serpent heads that flanked its base, those were carved from basalt, a stone so dense it could withstand centuries of rain and ritual. And then there was limestone, used to create the lime plaster that covered the temple's surfaces. The Aztecs would heat limestone in large kilns, transforming it into quicklime, which they mixed with sand and water to create a gleaming white coating. Onto this surface, they painted vivid murals, scenes of gods, warriors, and celestial patterns that made each temple a visual expression of the cosmos. Each material had to be sourced, and that alone was an immense undertaking. Quarries were often located miles from the building site, on the volcanic slopes surrounding the valley. Without wheels or draft animals, the Aztecs relied on human strength and ingenuity. Workers used wooden sleds and rollers made from tree trunks to move heavy stones, dragging them along specially built ramps or lubricating the path with water and clay. On the canals, large canoes ferried lighter materials, sand, lime, reeds, and tools, across the water, guided by teams of men with long poles. To organize these efforts, the empire relied on a system of tribute and labor known as tequio. Each community contributed manpower and materials to state projects, and every able-bodied citizen was expected to participate at some point. Construction was not just work, it was a sacred duty, a collective offering to the gods. When a new temple was being raised, entire villages might send groups of workers, musicians, and priests to help. The process became both ritual and celebration, filled with songs to keep rhythm and prayers to bless the stones. The tools themselves were as ingenious as the people who used them. The Aztecs worked primarily with stone, wood, and obsidian, materials that, in their hand, achieved astonishing precision. Their primary cutting tool was the obsidian blade. Obsidian, a volcanic glass found throughout central Mexico, could be flaked into edges sharper than modern steel scalpels. Builders used it to carve wood, shape stone, and even shave thin layers of plaster. The material's deep black sheen gave it an almost mystical presence, and it was considered a gift from the gods of the underworld. In fact, obsidian tools were often blessed before use, its cutting power seen as symbolic of transformation, separating raw matter from sacred form. For heavier work, the Aztecs used hammerstones made of hard basalt or diorite, shaped into rounded forms that could withstand repeated strikes. Wooden mallets and wedges were employed to split larger stones, while chisels made from deer, antler, or hardened bone helped shape finer details. Archaeologists have found that some chisels were tipped with copper, a material known to the Aztecs, though not used for structural purposes. It was too soft for large-scale cutting, but perfect for engraving and detail work. Transporting and lifting these stones required an understanding of balance and leverage. Builders used ropes made from maguey fiber, a plant-based cord strong enough to haul tons of weight. Wooden tripods and lever systems allowed them to raise blocks into place, one by one, often without any metal tools or pulleys. They built earthen ramps to drag materials upward, dismantling the ramps afterward once the work was done. Each step of the process was guided by overseers known as calpixque, who coordinated hundreds of laborers through shouted commands, drum beats, and conch shell signals that echoed across the site. The precision of their work was remarkable. Without compasses or modern measurement tools, they used knotted cords and sighting rods to align corners and edges. To ensure symmetry, builders often worked from a central axis outward, guided by priests who tracked the sun's shadow to maintain perfect orientation. In this way, architecture and astronomy merged seamlessly. Every line, every stairway, every corner of the temple was aligned with celestial motion. The Aztecs also mastered the art of lime plastering and pigment creation. They crushed minerals and plants to produce dazzling colors, red from hematite, blue from azurite and indigo, yellow from ochre, and black from charcoal and soot. These pigments were mixed with natural binders, giving them a luminous finish that endured for centuries. When Spanish chroniclers first saw the Templo Mayor, they described it as covered in radiant colors, shining like fire under the midday sun. Water, too, was one of their greatest materials. It was used not only for mixing mortar, but also as an instrument of engineering. Builders flooded certain areas intentionally to soften the soil before driving stakes or to float heavy stones closer to the site. The canals themselves became arteries of construction, allowing movement on a scale impossible on dry land. Every drop of the lake worked in harmony with the builder's rhythm, as if the city and water were partners in creation. To the Aztecs, these tools and materials were not merely practical, they were sacred. The earth gave stone, the mountains gave obsidian, the forests gave wood, and the waters gave life. Each element was bound to a god, and every act of shaping or cutting was an act of respect. When a worker chipped at a stone, he was not only building a wall, he was revealing the divine essence within it. Before construction began, tools were often blessed in small rituals. Priests sprinkled them with water and copal smoke, asking the gods to lend their strength to the builder's hands. It was believed that if the tools were used carelessly or disrespectfully, the temple's spirit would grow restless and the structure might fail. Building, therefore, was not only a technical process, but a moral and spiritual one, a dialogue between human effort and divine expectation. The sheer scale of this work is staggering to imagine. The Templo Mayor alone required tens of thousands of cubic meters of stone, each carried, cut, and placed by hand. Some estimates suggest that a full temple expansion could take years, with entire generations contributing to a single phase. Yet no one saw this as drudgery. It was sacred labor, a kind of living prayer. In the end, the Aztecs' mastery of material and tool was not born of abundance, but of limitation. Without metal, beasts, or wheels, they built through knowledge, coordination, and reverence for the elements themselves. Their city, rising from the water, gleaming with stone and color, was proof that innovation does not depend on what one has, but on what one understands. So when we marvel at the temples today, we are not only admiring architecture, we are witnessing a dialogue between humans and nature, carried out through stone, wood, and water. Each block, each pigment, each tool mark still whispers of a civilization that built not just to exist, but to honor the balance between the seen and the unseen. When you stand before the ruins of an ancient Aztec temple, it's easy to imagine the architects, the priests, the rulers, the visionaries who ordered it built. But beneath every towering pyramid and polished stairway was something even more remarkable. The people who made it happen, the countless men and women who, day after day, transformed mud, stone, and water into monuments that would outlast them all. To understand the grandeur of Aztec architecture, we must look beyond the stones to the society that placed them, how it mobilized thousands without iron, wheels, or animals, and how it turned construction into an act of devotion, discipline, and unity. The Aztec Empire, at its height in the early 16th century, was a complex web of tribute and obligation. Every city, every town, every family was part of a finely tuned system that served the dual engines of the state, war and religion. Building temples was both a duty to the gods and a demonstration of imperial power. At the top of this vast hierarchy stood the Tlatoani, the emperor himself. His command was divine law, and when he decreed that a new temple should rise, it was seen not as a political order, but as the will of the gods. The most famous of these rulers, Moctezuma IV and later Ahuitzotl, both oversaw expansions of the Templo Mayor, each phase grander than the last. They were not mere patrons, they were priests in their own right, believed to carry sacred authority. Beneath the emperor were the architects and engineers, known collectively as Tolteca. The word Toltec originally referred to the legendary master builders of earlier times, but by the Aztec era, it had become a title of honor. To be called a Toltec meant to be an artist of the highest order, a weaver of knowledge. These architects were scholars, astronomers, and geomancers all at once. They determined the temple's dimensions, orientation, and symbolic design, ensuring that every stairway, every altar, aligned with both the stars above and the waters below. But even the finest plan meant nothing without the people to carry it out. The Aztec state drew its workforce from all corners of the empire through a system of tribute labor called mitl or tequio. Every community under Aztec control was required to contribute a portion of its population to imperial projects. Some supplied food, others raw materials, and many sent workers, men trained in construction, quarrying, carpentry, or transport. These laborers were not slaves. Slavery did exist in Aztec society, but temple construction was considered a sacred civic duty, not a punishment. To build a temple was to gain honor for one's community and to offer one's strength to the gods. Each man who lifted a stone or mixed mortar was performing an act of worship. The workforce itself was astonishingly organized. It was divided into specialized groups, each overseen by foremen known as kalpixke. The kalpixk were administrators, part engineers, part bureaucrats, responsible for gathering laborers, maintaining records of materials, and ensuring that each task was completed on schedule. They reported to higher officials, often members of the priesthood or nobility, who visited the work sites to inspect progress and conduct daily rituals of blessing. Laborers were grouped into crews of 20 called kalpuli, drawn from local neighborhoods or villages. Each kalpuli had its own leader who maintained discipline and morale. The Aztecs understood that work was sustained through rhythm and spirit as much as through strength, and the sound of construction was never silent. Drummers kept time, singers led chants that celebrated the gods or invoked the spirit of the mountain whose stone they carved. Work was movement, sound, and prayer all at once. The daily schedule began at dawn. Workers assembled before sunrise, facing east as priests burned copal incense and offered prayers to the rising sun. Then, with a blast of a conch shell, the day's labor began. Teams carried baskets of stone and earth. Others mixed plaster or transported water by canoe from nearby canals. Supervisors moved among them, carrying staffs of authority adorned with feathers or shells. The scene was one of ordered motion, thousands working in harmony, each knowing his role. One of the most respected groups among the workers were the stonemasons, or Tetlapalcatsin. They were trained from youth in the art of carving stone, their skills passed down within families. Their work required extraordinary precision. Without metal chisels, they used obsidian and flint tools, shaping each block by feel and sound. They could tell by the pitch of a hammer's strike whether a stone was flawless or flawed. These masons were considered artists as much as craftsmen, and their names were sometimes recorded in codices, rare honors in Aztec history. Alongside them were the plasterers and painters, the tlacuiloque, the writers of color. Once the stone skeleton of a temple was complete, they transformed it into a masterpiece of color and symbolism. Their pigments were ground from minerals and plants, mixed with honey or tree sap for durability. They painted murals that told the stories of the gods, covered columns in geometric patterns, and adorned walls with images of serpents, rain clouds, and celestial signs. Their work made the temple not only an architectural structure, but a cosmic narrative in pigment and light. Another vital group were the water carriers and canal workers who ensured that the site remained dry and the materials moved efficiently. They built small levees and wooden bridges, redirecting the flow of the lake when necessary. Without them, the foundations would have flooded, the lime would not have set, and the city's balance with the water would have faltered. Women also played essential roles, though less visible in the grand narrative of construction. They prepared food for the laborers, corn cakes, beans, chilies, and fermented drinks that sustained the thousands working in the heat. Some women were artisans themselves, weaving the cords used to bind scaffolding or crafting ceremonial cloths for the dedication rites. In the final stages, priestesses participated in purification rituals, washing the temple steps with scented water and flower petals before consecration. The scale of coordination was staggering. Archaeologists estimate that the final phase of the Templo Mayor may have involved as many as 10,000 workers laboring simultaneously. Every stone hauled, every basket of earth carried, was part of a massive human network pulsing with devotion and precision. The Aztec state, despite lacking written blueprints in the modern sense, managed these projects with astonishing efficiency through oral instruction, ritual synchronization, and social cohesion. One might wonder how such an enormous workforce maintained order. The answer lay in belief. To the Aztecs, labor was sacred, laziness was a moral failing. The gods themselves had labored to create the world. Why should humans do less? Myths told of how the gods bled and toiled to raise the sun into the sky. Thus, to work was to imitate divine action. A man who shirked his duty dishonored his ancestors and endangered the balance of the cosmos. At the end of each workday, as the sun sank behind the mountains, the site fell silent again. The priests would step forward to offer thanks, sprinkling maize and water upon the stones. Workers sat along the canal banks, their bodies weary, their minds still echoing with the rhythm of drums. In the distance, the city lights flickered across the lake, mirrored in the still water. Each man and woman knew they were part of something larger than themselves, a living monument to their gods, their city, and their shared endurance. When the temple finally stood complete, rising from the heart of the city, like a mountain reborn, the entire population joined in days of celebration. Musicians played, dancers performed, and feasts filled the plazas. The laborers walked among the crowds with pride. Though their names were seldom recorded, their work was immortal. The temple was theirs as much as it was the emperor's or the priest's. Every stone bore their fingerprints, every stairway, their sweat. The organization of labor in Aztec society was not just administrative brilliance, it was a reflection of the empire's worldview. To the Mexica, the world itself was built through cooperation, gods and humans working together to sustain creation. Their temples, therefore, were not monuments of power alone, but of unity, a vision of a civilization where faith and function, labor and love were inseparable. So when you imagine the great temple of Tenochtitlan rising from the misty waters. Remember not only the emperors and the gods, but the thousands of unseen hands that made it possible. The men who carried the stones, the women who wove the ropes, the priests who blessed the tools. Each was a thread in the great fabric of creation. Together, they built more than temples. They built a world. When you gaze upon the ruins of an Aztec temple, what immediately strikes the eye is the sheer verticality of the structure. The steep, imposing staircases, the tiered platforms that rise like steps toward the sky. This is the step pyramid, a design that defined Aztec sacred architecture. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, the step pyramid was both a functional and symbolic creation, blending engineering with mythology, ritual with human scale. At its core, the step pyramid was a physical expression of the Aztec cosmology. Every level represented a plane of existence, a stage between the earthly realm and the divine. The base symbolized the mortal world, grounded in human experience and the nurturing soil of Tlaltekutli, the earth goddess. As one ascended, the tiers represented increasingly sacred realms. First, the realms of human and ancestral spirits, then the liminal space between earth and sky, and finally, the summit, where the shrines of the gods dwelled. Climbing the steps was thus a ritualized reenactment of the cosmos itself, an ascent through levels of existence toward divine proximity. The geometry of the step pyramid was deliberate and precise. Most Aztec pyramids were built in a square or rectangular footprint, with each tier slightly smaller than the one below, creating a tapering effect. The slope of the stairways was steep, often around 45 degrees, demanding effort and reverence from those who climbed. This steepness was intentional. The climb itself became an act of devotion, a reminder that the path to the gods required perseverance and humility. Pilgrims, priests, and even rulers experienced the temple as a vertical journey, every step a measured movement in a cosmic dance. The number of tiers carried symbolic significance. While not standardized across all temples, the tiers often reflected sacred numbers tied to Aztec calendars and mythology. For example, the Templo Mayor had dual shrines at its summit, one for Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, and one for Tlaloc, the rain and fertility god, echoing the duality of life and death, war and sustenance. Each tier below them contained platforms for altars, ritual offerings, and ceremonial spaces, forming a sacred hierarchy visible from the city below. Functionally, the step pyramid served multiple purposes. The broad platforms offered stable bases for altars and shrines, allowing priests to conduct rituals visible to large crowds. The terraces also provided structural integrity, distributing the weight of the massive stone temple evenly over its foundation. The stepped design worked in harmony with the soft lake bed of Tenochtitlan, reducing the risk of collapse by breaking the mass into smaller, stable units rather than relying on one monolithic block. The orientation and symmetry of the step pyramid were as critical as its tiers. The Templo Mayor, for instance, aligned precisely with the cardinal directions. Its stairways faced east and west, connecting the rising and setting sun with the twin shrines. This alignment created dramatic lighting effects during equinoxes and solstices, when sunlight would illuminate the shrines and altars in perfect harmony with the calendar. The pyramid itself became a giant sundial, a monument that merged time, space, and ritual into one sacred object. Materials used in constructing the step pyramid reinforced both its practicality and its symbolism. Tezontle, a lightweight volcanic stone, formed much of the core structure, while basalt and andesite framed the stairways and edges. Lime plaster covered the outer surfaces, allowing intricate murals and symbolic patterns to be painted on the stone. The colors themselves were deeply meaningful: red for Huitzilopochtli, blue for Tlaloc, black for death and the north, and white for purification. The pyramid was not simply a building, it was a cosmic canvas, a narrative in stone, pigment, and light. Each stairway was more than a means of ascent. The steps themselves were crafted to produce rhythm and sound. Drums and conch shells, used in ceremonies, resonated against the stone terraces, amplifying the energy of ritual. The steps created acoustic corridors, enhancing chants, music, and the ceremonial presence of priests. This integration of structure, sound, and ritual demonstrated the Aztecs' understanding that architecture was not just visual, but sensory, engaging multiple dimensions of perception. The dual shrines atop the Templo Mayor illustrate how the step pyramid could house multiple deities and multiple cosmological principles simultaneously. One shrine was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, symbolizing war, conquest, and the sun's vital energy. The other honored Tlaloc, representing rain, fertility, and agricultural sustenance. By placing them side by side, the Aztecs expressed a profound truth. Life is a balance of opposing forces. The pyramid's height, steepness, and visibility reinforced this duality, making it both a political statement and a spiritual manifesto. Step pyramids were also platforms for sacrifice, a central ritual in Aztec religion. From the summit, priests offered food, incense, and in some cases, human hearts to the gods. The height amplified the ceremonial power. Offerings appeared to ascend directly to the heavens, visible from across the city. The very structure of the pyramid facilitated these acts, combining sacred geometry with ritual function. Every element, the number of steps, the width of the terraces, the orientation toward celestial bodies, was designed to maximize spiritual efficacy. Another fascinating aspect was the integration of the pyramid with the surrounding cityscape. Step pyramids were rarely isolated. They formed the center of plazas, markets, and administrative buildings. Their terraces overlooked canals and causeways, ensuring that every ascent could be seen from afar. This visual dominance reinforced the pyramid's role as the navel of the city, the symbolic and physical center where gods, rulers, and citizens intersected. The construction of the step pyramid was iterative. Temples were often rebuilt or expanded over time. Archaeologists have found multiple layers beneath the Templo Mayor, each representing a different phase of construction. Each new layer raised the pyramid higher, expanding shrines and terraces to accommodate the empire's growing spiritual and political ambitions. This process also allowed priests to align new constructions with updated astronomical observations or religious directives. In essence, each pyramid was alive, growing with the civilization itself. Even the angles and proportions carried mathematical sophistication. While the Aztecs did not use our modern geometry, they understood ratios and symmetry intuitively. Each platform's height, stair width, and overall taper were calculated to provide stability while conveying grandeur. The steps were intentionally steep to emphasize verticality, and the terraces proportioned to reflect cosmic order. These design choices illustrate a society that combined empirical observation, artistic vision, and symbolic meaning into one unified structure. Step pyramids also created dramatic visual effects. Viewed from below, they appeared taller than they were, their steep slopes exaggerating verticality. Painted surfaces and carved motifs interacted with sunlight, casting shadows that changed with the day and season. From the summit, priests and rulers could survey the entire city, canals, and surrounding mountains, reinforcing their connection to the land and the divine. The step pyramid was both a stage for ceremony and a lens through which the Aztec cosmos was made visible. In the end, the step pyramid was more than a construction technique. It was a philosophy in stone. Its tiers expressed the hierarchy of the universe. Its orientation mapped celestial rhythms. Its stairways demanded devotion, and its terraces enabled ritual power. Each pyramid was a bridge between worlds, earth and sky, mortal and divine, human effort and cosmic law. To stand at the foot of an Aztec step pyramid is to feel a combination of awe and understanding. Every block, every step, every painted mural was the result of knowledge, labor, and belief intertwined. It was an architecture of intent, designed to be seen, experienced, and understood as part of the living universe. The Aztecs built their pyramids to rise not just in height, but in significance, ascending from earthly mud into celestial meaning. And that is why, even centuries later, the step pyramids of Tenochtitlan remain a testament to a civilization that could shape stone, space, and imagination into monuments of enduring power. The towering step pyramids of Tenochtitlan were not merely architectural feats, they were living stages for the sacred drama of Aztec life. Every stair, terrace, and altar was designed to facilitate ritual, to channel energy from the gods, and to connect the human world to the divine. To understand Aztec temples, one must understand that they were not static buildings. They were dynamic spaces of ceremony, transformation, and devotion. At the heart of Aztec ritual was the belief that the gods required nourishment to maintain the balance of the universe. The sun had to rise, the rains had to fall, crops had to grow, and the cycle of life and death had to continue. The Aztecs believed that this sustenance was provided through ceremony, a spectrum of acts ranging from offerings of food and incense to the most intense rituals involving human sacrifice. Temples were the vessels through which these acts were performed, designed to amplify spiritual power through architecture, orientation, and audience. The plaza surrounding a temple was as important as the temple itself. Here, priests and rulers could assemble large crowds, allowing citizens to witness and participate in rituals. Festivals often coincided with the Aztec calendar, particularly the 260-day ritual calendar, Tonalpohualli, and the 365-day solar calendar, Xiuhpohualli. Each day was associated with specific deities, omens, and required actions, and temples served as the central points where these cosmic instructions were enacted. One of the most dramatic rituals was the human sacrifice, often performed atop the pyramid's summit. While this aspect of Aztec religion is frequently emphasized in modern accounts, It is essential to see it in context. Sacrifice was a profound religious act, not mere spectacle. The priests believed that offering life to the gods was necessary to sustain the sun and the cosmos. Victims were often war captives, and the ceremony was conducted with precision and solemnity. The altar atop the pyramid served as a threshold between earth and sky, where the act of offering was seen as transferring life force directly to the divine. The climbing of the pyramid steps itself was ritualized. Priests and sometimes warriors ascending to perform ceremonies did so in processions, often chanting or drumming to maintain rhythm and invoke sacred presence. Every step was deliberate, a movement imbued with meaning. Some rituals involved lighting fires or burning incense at successive tiers, creating a vertical ritual journey that mirrored the mythic ascent of the gods themselves. To participate or even observe this climb was to engage in a spiritual journey, connecting human action to cosmic purpose. Ceremonial offerings were not limited to sacrifice. Temples were adorned with precious stones, feathers, and ceramics, all representing divine favor. The Aztecs placed food offerings, maize, beans, and tamales, at altars to honor gods of fertility and agriculture. Water and flowers were sprinkled to symbolize renewal, and incense smoke carried prayers upward. Even small offerings were carefully oriented according to direction and date, ensuring alignment with celestial cycles. Music and sound played a central role in ritual. Drums, rattles, flutes, and conch shells were used to summon divine presence, maintain rhythm in processions, and amplify the energy of ceremonies. The step pyramid's terraces created natural acoustics, allowing chants and instruments to resonate across the plaza. The vibrations of sound were believed to carry spiritual potency, bridging the human and divine worlds. Each beat and note was a thread in the tapestry of ritual, synchronized with the architecture and the movement of participants. Temples were also venues for festivals, which could last several days or weeks. These festivals celebrated deities like Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl, and Saipetotec, each with specific rituals. The festivals combined dance, music, storytelling, feasting, and symbolic acts of devotion. During these events, the temple became a stage for cosmic reenactment, where myths were brought to life through performance, and the city itself participated in the rhythm of the universe. Priests played multiple roles in these ceremonies. They were astrologers, scholars, ritual specialists, and intermediaries between the human and divine. Their duties included tracking time according to sacred calendars, performing purification rites, consecrating altars, and instructing citizens in ritual participation. Priests often wore elaborate costumes decorated with feathers, animal skins, and jewelry, symbolizing the deities they represented. The summit of the pyramid allowed them to embody the presence of the gods visually, ensuring that all who looked upward could feel the ritual's spiritual significance. Rituals also involved the recitation of sacred texts and chants. These were often memorized oral compositions, recounting the creation myths, genealogies of gods and rulers, and instructions for maintaining cosmic order. Each recitation was carefully timed to the sun, moon, and stars. The pyramid itself amplified the sound, and the audience, spread across terraces and plazas, experienced these chants as immersive waves of sound and rhythm. This coordination of architecture, sound, and ceremony made the temple a living instrument of devotion. The Aztecs also used temple spaces for divination and prophecy. Priests would interpret omens, read patterns in smoke or blood, or study celestial movements from the temple summit. These readings guided decisions ranging from agricultural planning to warfare. In this way, the temple was not only a spiritual hub, but a practical center for governance, where ritual knowledge informed the empire's strategy and survival. Art and imagery within the temple further reinforced ritual meaning. Murals, sculptures, and reliefs depicted gods, mythic battles, and symbolic animals. Every visual element was part of the ceremonial narrative. For example, serpents carved along stairways represented Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, symbolizing transformation and divine power. Eagle and jaguar motifs signified warriors' strength and cosmic energy. Observing these images during ritual was an act of immersion in myth, turning the temple itself into a story that guided human action. The integration of festival, architecture, and celestial timing demonstrates that Aztec ritual was holistic. Temples were designed not just to house ceremonies, but to amplify them, to create a space where humans could interact with gods, align with celestial rhythms, and experience a sense of cosmic order. Every step, every offering, every chant and sound reinforced the connection between the city, the cosmos, and the divine. Even outside of formal ceremonies, the temple precincts were active. Citizens brought personal offerings, sought guidance from priests, or observed ongoing rituals. Markets and communal spaces surrounding the temples connected daily life with sacred practice, ensuring that the rhythm of worship was woven into the fabric of society. Temples were, in essence, the heartbeat of the city, pulsing with ritual energy that maintained both spiritual and civic order. The grandeur and intensity of Aztec ritual also reinforced political authority. The emperor, by sponsoring temple construction and leading or attending ceremonies, demonstrated both spiritual and temporal power. Temples were visible symbols of divine favor and imperial reach. Rituals were not only acts of worship, they were also demonstrations of cohesion, reminding citizens that the gods, the ruler, and the city were inseparably linked. In conclusion, ritual and ceremony defined the life of an Aztec temple. The step pyramid, the terraces, the altars, the orientation, the sound, and the images were all part of a carefully orchestrated system. Through these ceremonies, the Aztecs maintained cosmic balance, reinforced social hierarchy, and experienced the divine in tangible, physical ways. Temples were not passive monuments, they were living instruments of the sacred, where architecture, labor, art, and devotion merged into experiences that shaped both the city and its people. To stand at the foot or summit of an Aztec temple was to witness the universe in miniature, a carefully ordered cosmos, alive with ritual, vibration, and meaning, where humans and gods intersected in every sound, movement, and offering. The Aztec temple was more than a physical structure. It was a language in stone, a carefully crafted message about the universe, human life, and divine order. Every aspect of the design, from the height of its steps to the orientation of its stairways carried meaning. To understand the temples fully, one must see them not only as engineering feats, but as codified expressions of cosmology, mythology, and power. At the most basic level, the pyramid shape itself was symbolic. Its wide base and tapering summit represented the connection between the earthly and the divine. The base stood for the mortal realm, solid and grounded, where humans lived and worked. As one ascended the tiers, the structure embodied increasing spiritual elevation. First, the human world, then liminal spaces, and finally, the summit where the gods resided. Every step was an enactment of spiritual progression, a physical reflection of the Aztec belief that life was a journey toward divine communion. The dual shrines atop the Templo Mayor exemplify one of the most important aspects of Aztec symbolism: duality and balance. One shrine honored Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun, while the other honored Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. This pairing communicated a central truth of Aztec thought. Life required the balance of opposing forces: war and agriculture, death and life, sun and rain, all had to coexist. The pyramid physically embodied this balance, reminding every observer and participant of the interconnectedness of existence. Orientation was another deeply symbolic element. Temples were carefully aligned with the cardinal directions, each representing different aspects of the cosmos. East was associated with birth and the rising sun, west with death and the setting sun, north with the underworld, and south with life and fertility. Aligning the stairways and platforms to these directions allowed the temple to function as a cosmic map, connecting daily human experience to the cycles of the sun, stars, and seasons. It ensured that every ritual, every step taken by a priest or worshiper resonated with universal order. The number of steps and tiers also conveyed meaning. While numbers varied from temple to temple, many were tied to sacred numerology. Numbers like 4, 13, and 20 held spiritual significance. 4 represented the cardinal points, 13 symbolized the heavens, 20 corresponded to a complete cycle of the Aztec calendar. Each step and level was a physical manifestation of these abstract principles, turning the climb into a meditative journey through sacred mathematics. The stairways themselves were more than functional. They were symbolic paths. Ascending a staircase was an act of devotion and transformation. The steepness and difficulty emphasized the effort required to approach the divine. Ritual participants understood that each upward step symbolized leaving the ordinary world behind and entering increasingly sacred space. The pyramid was not just a stage for worship, it was a pathway of spiritual ascent, physically demanding and morally instructive. The placement of altars and shrines on the terraces reinforced these symbolic themes. Shrines were positioned to reflect astronomical events, seasonal changes, and mythic narratives. Certain altars faced the mountains, where clouds gathered, linking Tlaloc to rainfall and fertility. Others faced the sunrise, connecting Huitzilopochtli to life-giving energy. Each placement told a story, turning the temple into a narrative landscape where the cosmos could be read like a book, layer by layer, step by step. Color also played a profound symbolic role. Temples were painted with vivid hues, each with layered meaning. Red represented blood, life force, and war. Blue symbolized water, sky, and fertility. Black indicated death, night, and the underworld. White represented purity and renewal. Murals, geometric patterns, and painted reliefs transformed the temple into a living tapestry, visible from afar and immersive up close. Every color and motif was chosen to convey spiritual truths, creating a visual and symbolic language that reinforced ritual and cosmology. Animals and natural symbols were integrated into architecture as well. Serpents often adorned stairways or altar edges, symbolizing transformation, rebirth, and divine power. Eagles represented the sun and warriors, while jaguars symbolized the night and fierce protection. Mountains, rivers, and celestial motifs carved into stone connected the temple to the broader landscape, ensuring that the structure resonated with both the physical and spiritual worlds. The height of the pyramid was symbolic of proximity to the divine. Taller pyramids conveyed greater spiritual authority both to humans and the gods. From the summit, priests could survey the city, canals, and surrounding mountains, asserting their role as intermediaries between mortals and deities. The pyramid's verticality also reinforced the sacred nature of ritual acts performed at the top. Offerings, prayers, and sacrifices literally ascended toward the sky, visible to the city below, amplifying their spiritual power. Material choices reinforced symbolism. Volcanic stone linked the structure to the mountains and earth, obsidian to the underworld and spiritual insight, and lime plaster allowed bright colors that symbolized the elements. Even the construction methods were symbolic. Layering stone, soil, and mortar reflected cosmic order, balancing stability with the flexibility of living earth. The very act of building was a form of devotion, embedding spiritual meaning into every block. The temple also functioned as a calendar and astronomical instrument. Certain corners and stair alignments marked solstices, equinoxes, and zenith passages of the sun. Rituals performed at specific times were amplified by these alignments, connecting human action to celestial cycles. The temple, in this sense, was a temporal symbol as well as a spatial one, a monument that linked past, present, and future, humans and gods, earth and sky. Even the temple precincts reinforced symbolism. Surrounding plazas, smaller altars, and ceremonial platforms echoed the hierarchy of the pyramid. Processions moved along predetermined routes, emphasizing movement through cosmic and social order. Markets and residential areas were placed in relation to the sacred center, creating a city that reflected the symbolic hierarchy of the universe. The Aztec temple was not isolated. It structured life, society, and thought, a constant reminder of cosmic balance. In essence, Aztec temples were multi-layered messages. They communicated theology, cosmology, social hierarchy, and political authority simultaneously. Every decision, height, slope, tier, stairway, orientation, color, and ornament, was deliberate. To ascend, to observe, or even to approach the temple was to read and experience a complex language of meaning, carefully encoded in stone and ritual. To stand before one of these pyramids is to witness the Aztecs' worldview embodied. The architecture teaches that the universe is structured, ordered, and interconnected, that life is a balance of forces and that human action is inseparable from divine will. The temple was both a map and a mirror, mapping the cosmos while reflecting the civilization that built it. Even centuries later, the symbolic language of the Aztec temple endures. Archaeologists, historians, and visitors can trace the principles of duality, hierarchy, celestial alignment, and spiritual journey through the ruins. The step pyramid is more than stone. It is a codified vision of the universe, a testament to a culture that infused meaning into every dimension of their built environment. The architectural symbolism of Aztec temples reminds us that buildings can be more than shelter or monument. They can be languages, stories, and bridges between humans and the divine. Each temple was a story told in stone, a philosophy written in shape and color, a ritual space that communicated the order of the cosmos. Through these structures, the Aztecs taught that life, labor, devotion, and the universe itself are inseparable, and that every ascent, every physical or spiritual step is meaningful. If there is one Aztec temple that captures the imagination more than any other, it is the Templo Mayor, the great temple of Tenochtitlan, standing at the heart of the city, rising from the center of Lake Texcoco. It was more than a building. It was the spiritual and political center of the empire, a living symbol of the Aztecs' mastery over earth, water, and the cosmos. To study the Templo Mayor is to understand the heart of Aztec civilization itself. The Templo Mayor was a twin shrine pyramid reflecting the central duality of Aztec religion. One shrine honored Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, and the other honored Tlaloc, the rain and fertility god. This duality defined the Aztec worldview, the interplay of war and sustenance, of sky and water, of destruction and creation. From the very foundation to the summit, the pyramid was constructed to embody this cosmic balance. Construction of the Templo Mayor was a multi-phase endeavor with at least 7 known expansions over approximately a century. Each new phase involved raising the pyramid, enlarging terraces, and sometimes covering earlier versions entirely. Archaeological evidence shows that older layers were carefully buried beneath new ones, preserving sacred spaces while allowing the temple to grow. This practice reflected a philosophy of continuity. The past was honored even as the structure evolved to accommodate new political, religious, or astronomical needs. The orientation and location of the Templo Mayor were deliberate and symbolic. It aligned with the cardinal directions, with the main stairways facing east and west. The east stairway symbolized birth, the rising sun, and Huitzilopochtli, while the west stairway represented death, the setting sun, and Tlaloc's domain. The temple's central location in Tenochtitlan made it the city's axis mundi, the point where the earthly and divine intersected, visible from canals, causeways, and the surrounding plazas. The Templo Mayor's physical dimensions were impressive. The final phase rose approximately 60 feet, around 18 meters, above its base, with stairways steep enough to demand reverence and effort from climbers. Each tier provided platforms for shrines, altars, and ceremonial spaces, allowing priests to conduct rituals while visible to thousands of worshippers gathered below. The design created a powerful sense of verticality, emphasizing that the gods dwelled above and that human devotion required ascent and effort. Material selection for the Templo Mayor reflected both practicality and symbolic intent. The core of the pyramid consisted of tezantli, a lightweight volcanic rock that provided stability without overburdening the lakebed foundation. Heavier basalt and andesite framed stairways, edges, and altars. Lime plaster coated the surfaces, providing a canvas for vivid murals and painted reliefs, which depicted gods, celestial symbols, and mythological narratives. Each choice, stone type, plaster, and pigment, was deliberate, integrating engineering, artistry, and spiritual meaning. The ritual significance of the Templo Mayor cannot be overstated. Its summit hosted daily and seasonal ceremonies that reinforced cosmic and social order. Priests conducted offerings of food, incense, and at times human hearts to sustain the gods. The temple served as the ceremonial hub for the Tlacaxipehualistli, Panquetzalistli, and other major festivals, each aligned with sacred calendar dates and celestial events. From the summit, priests orchestrated these rituals, their chants, drums, and conch shells resonating across the plaza below. The architecture amplified both sound and spiritual presence, making ritual both visible and experiential for participants. Excavations of the Templo Mayor have revealed multiple layers of offerings and sacred deposits. Beneath each platform, archaeologists have uncovered caches of obsidian blades, ceramic figurines, shells, jade, and miniature effigies of gods. These items were not decorative. They were believed to spiritually stabilize the temple, linking each stone and terrace to divine favor. Buried offerings indicate a sophisticated understanding of both symbolic practice and long-term ritual planning, demonstrating that the Aztecs considered every structural element to be spiritually active. The dual shrines themselves were remarkable. Huitzilopochtli's shrine was adorned in red, a color symbolizing blood, war, and life force, while Tlaloc's shrine used blue, evoking water, rain, and agricultural fertility. Each contained altars and sacred objects, including serpent sculptures and carved stone imagery that represented mythological narratives. Pilgrims and priests moving between these shrines experienced a microcosm of Aztec cosmology, the tension and harmony between destruction and growth, heat and rain, life and death, human sacrifice, though often sensationalized in modern retellings, was central to the temple's ritual role. Victims were offered at the summit, their hearts believed to feed the sun and sustain the universe. The architectural layout ensured that these rituals were visible from the plaza, reinforcing the sacred authority of the temple, the priesthood, and the emperor. Sacrificial practices were highly regulated, performed by trained priests, and deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the calendar. The temple precinct surrounding the Templo Mayor further amplified its symbolic function. Smaller altars, ceremonial platforms, and marketplaces radiated outward, reflecting the hierarchical order of the universe. Processions along the plazas and causeways emphasized movement through sacred space, guiding citizens from the ordinary world into the temple's spiritual domain. The entire city was organized as a reflection of cosmic order, with the Templo Mayor at its center. The Templo Mayor was also an astronomical instrument. Certain corners and stairways aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and zenith passages of the sun. Rituals were timed to these celestial events, ensuring that offerings and ceremonies harmonized with natural and cosmic cycles. Architecture, astronomy, and ritual were inseparable, transforming the temple into a bridge between human action and cosmic rhythm. The aesthetic grandeur of the temple was equally important. Murals, stone carvings, and sculptures conveyed mythological narratives to all who approached. Symbolism was embedded not only in color and imagery, but in proportion, alignment, and material choice. Every surface, every level, and every ornament carried meaning, making the Templo Mayor a multi-dimensional text of Aztec belief, readable through observation, movement, and participation. Finally, the Templo Mayor stands as a testament to human ingenuity. Built on a marshy lakebed without modern machinery, it combined engineering, organization, artistry, and ritual in a way that allowed a massive city to function as a spiritual, civic, and astronomical center. The layered construction, sophisticated foundation, and symbolic precision reveal a civilization that viewed architecture as both practical and sacred, functional and narrative. The Templo Mayor is not just a temple, it is the embodiment of the Aztec worldview. Every stone, every stair, every painted surface communicates a complex understanding of the cosmos, society, and human responsibility. Through its dual shrines, its terraces, its orientation, and its rituals, it remains the ultimate case study in how architecture, labor, and belief intersected in one of history's most remarkable civilizations. Standing before its remains, one can imagine the temple alive, the sound of drums, the smell of copal smoke, the shimmer of sunlight on red and blue paint, the rhythm of pilgrims ascending its steps. Every detail, from material to orientation to ritual, was part of a unified system of meaning, a living testament to the Aztecs' mastery of both the physical and spiritual worlds. The Templo Mayor teaches us that temples were more than monuments. They were instruments of cosmology, society, and devotion, encoding knowledge, power, and faith into the very stones themselves. It is, in many ways, the pinnacle of Aztec architecture, philosophy, and ritual combined. Building monumental temples in the heart of Tenochtitlan presented the Aztecs with an array of engineering challenges that would have daunted any civilization. The city itself was constructed on a series of small islands within Lake Texcoco, a landscape of shifting waters, marshy soil, and volcanic deposits. Raising massive step pyramids on such unstable ground required ingenuity, organization, and an intimate understanding of materials, mechanics, and hydrology. The first challenge was foundation stability. The lakebed consisted of soft, waterlogged mud interspersed with clay and sand. Without a solid base, the immense weight of stone terraces could sink, tilt, or collapse. To counter this, the Aztecs developed a method similar to modern piling. Workers drove wooden stakes into the ground, often in a grid pattern, to distribute the load evenly and anchor structures in place. Layers of compacted earth, sand, and stone were built up gradually, creating a stable platform on which the pyramids could rise. Archaeological evidence suggests that these foundations were carefully monitored and periodically reinforced during each expansion of the temples. Water management was another significant issue. The surrounding lake was both a resource and a threat. Seasonal rains and fluctuating water levels could flood construction sites, erode foundations, and disrupt the transport of materials. The Aztecs ingeniously integrated canals, dikes, and levees to control water flow. Canals allowed materials to be transported efficiently by canoe, while dikes and embankments protected the temple site from flooding. Workers created small drainage channels within the pyramid itself, ensuring that rainwater would not pool on terraces or stairways, reducing long-term erosion. Transporting massive stones from quarries presented further engineering problems. Many of the basalt, andesite, and tezontle blocks were quarried miles from the city without wheeled vehicles or draft animals. The Aztecs relied on human labor combined with simple mechanical principles. Stones were loaded onto wooden sleds and moved over lubricated pathways using rollers made from tree trunks. Teams of men used coordinated rhythm, often synchronized with chants or drum beats, to pull enormous blocks. For larger stones, temporary earthen ramps were constructed to drag them up to higher tiers, a technique that required careful planning to maintain structural balance during construction. The pyramid's step design itself was a solution to engineering challenges. Rather than constructing a single monolithic structure, the Aztecs built multiple layers of terraces, each slightly smaller than the one below. This approach distributed weight more evenly and reduced lateral stress on the lower tiers, minimizing the risk of collapse. The terraces also created natural drainage channels and allowed for easier repair or reinforcement over time, demonstrating a practical understanding of long-term structural resilience. The choice of materials was both symbolic and functional. Tezontle, the lightweight volcanic rock, was used for the pyramid cores because it provided sufficient mass without excessively stressing the foundations. Harder stones, like basalt and andesite, were reserved for stairways, edges, and altars, areas requiring durability and precision. Lime plaster coating added additional stability, binding surface layers and protecting the core from erosion. Each material was selected with careful consideration of load, weathering, and ritual function, revealing a nuanced integration of engineering and symbolism. Another challenge was precision and alignment. Temples were oriented to the cardinal directions and aligned with celestial events such as solstices and equinoxes. Achieving such accuracy without modern surveying tools required careful observation and ingenious techniques. The Aztecs used sighting rods, plumb lines, knotted cords, and natural markers like distant mountains and sunrise points to achieve remarkable precision. Astronomers and priests worked closely with builders to ensure that stairways, altars, and terraces aligned perfectly with both the horizon and sacred dates, blending engineering, ritual, and cosmic knowledge. The height and steepness of the pyramids presented yet another set of challenges. Building steep stairways that could safely support both ritual participants and heavy stone transport required careful structural calculation. The Aztecs solved this by constructing temporary scaffolding and ramps, allowing workers to move materials and maintain precise angles. Each tier was leveled carefully using water-filled channels and plumb lines, ensuring that subsequent layers could be added without destabilizing the structure. This combination of temporary construction aids and geometric understanding reflects an impressive grasp of applied engineering principles. Seismic activity was also a concern. The Valley of Mexico is prone to earthquakes, and the lake bed itself could amplify ground movement. Step pyramid construction minimized this risk in several ways. The layered terraces and flexible core materials allowed the structure to absorb and dissipate seismic energy. The use of wooden stakes embedded in the foundation further increased resilience, as they could bend slightly without breaking, acting as shock absorbers for the entire structure. This understanding of natural forces demonstrates the Aztecs' practical observation of their environment and adaptive building strategies. Human coordination was a non-technical but equally critical engineering challenge. Massive construction projects required hundreds, sometimes thousands, of laborers working in precise unison. The Aztecs overcame this by using a hierarchical system of oversight. Foremen called Calpixki supervised crews of workers, maintaining rhythm, order, and morale. Chanting, drumming, and visual signals allowed large teams to move heavy stones together, coordinating timing and effort. This orchestration of labor was as much an engineering solution as it was a social one. Maintenance and renovation were part of the engineering plan from the start. Temples were rebuilt in successive layers, with older versions buried beneath new terraces. This method allowed for structural reinforcement over time, facilitated corrections in alignment, and provided opportunities to incorporate new materials or symbolic elements. Each reconstruction phase was an exercise in applied engineering, requiring careful integration with previous layers while maintaining ritual continuity. The Aztecs also demonstrated remarkable problem solving in tool use. Without metal chisels, they relied on obsidian, basalt, and wooden tools, yet they achieved astonishing precision. Obsidian blades were used for carving fine details in stone and plaster, while heavier hammerstones and mallets shaped larger blocks. Leverage, pulleys made from rope and wooden frames, and coordinated labor allowed them to lift and place massive stones with incredible accuracy. Every step was carefully planned, turning simple tools and raw materials into highly effective engineering instruments. Finally, the Aztecs integrated ritual considerations into engineering. Temples had to support not only static weight, but dynamic ceremonial activity. Processions, sacrifices, and festival gatherings placed additional loads on stairways and terraces. The builders accounted for these by reinforcing platforms, widening staircases at critical points, and strategically placing altars to distribute human weight. Engineering and ritual were inseparable. The structure had to support devotion as much as gravity. In conclusion, the engineering of Aztec temples was a triumph of observation, ingenuity, and collaboration. By addressing challenges of unstable soil, water management, material transport, structural weight, seismic activity, precision alignment, and human coordination, the Aztecs created structures that were both monumental and enduring. Their solutions combined practical mechanics, material science, labor organization, and ritual integration, producing temples that were as resilient as they were spiritually profound. The Templo Mayor and other step pyramids stand today not only as testaments to architectural skill, but as living examples of engineering intertwined with cosmology and culture. The Aztecs built with awareness of natural forces, human potential, and divine expectation, ensuring that every stone, step, and terrace served multiple purposes: structural, symbolic, and spiritual. Their accomplishments remind us that engineering is not merely technical, it is an art, a philosophy, and, in the case of the Aztecs, a sacred practice. When we imagine the monumental temples of the Aztecs, it's tempting to assume that such impressive structures would require iron, wheels, or advanced machinery. Yet, the Aztecs built their pyramids, including the Templo Mayor, without these technologies, relying instead on sophisticated knowledge, ingenuity, and simple but highly effective tools. Understanding these tools and techniques is crucial to appreciating the scale of their accomplishments. The foundation of Aztec construction technology lay in stone tools. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was a primary material for cutting, carving, and shaping. Obsidian blades are sharper than steel in some contexts, and the Aztecs used them to carve intricate reliefs, create fine plaster patterns, and even sculpt ceremonial objects. Larger hammerstones, made of basalt or other hard rocks, were used to shape the basic blocks of construction. These simple tools allowed remarkable precision, demonstrating the Aztecs' skill in leveraging material properties to achieve extraordinary results. Wooden implements played a similarly essential role. Poles and levers were used to move stones, lift beams, and position altar blocks. Wooden sleds transported heavy rocks across soft, marshy terrain, and logs served as rollers to reduce friction. Rope, woven from agave fibers, created pulleys and hoists that multiplied human strength. Simple physics, combined with careful observation, allowed the Aztecs to move massive stones with accuracy, despite lacking modern machinery. For carving, the Aztecs used a combination of abrasive techniques and direct percussion. Stones were struck with hammerstones, slowly shaped by repeated blows, and then polished using sand and water. This process required patience, skill, and an intimate understanding of each stone's properties. Obsidian was often employed for finer detail, while coarser stones were shaped with larger tools. This combination of precision and brute force allowed the Aztecs to create both the monumental and the intricate simultaneously. Mortar and plaster technology was equally sophisticated. Lime plaster, derived from heated limestone, was mixed with water and sometimes organic additives like tree sap or maguey juice to increase adhesion and durability. This plaster served multiple purposes. It sealed the stonework against water, provided a smooth canvas for murals, and strengthened terraces against erosion. Aztec builders understood that the plaster was not merely decorative, it was a vital component of structural integrity. Water management tools were also critical. Canals and temporary ditches required shovels, wooden spades, and baskets to move soil efficiently. Water channels within pyramid foundations were carefully lined and angled to prevent pooling, reducing the risk of collapse. These simple technologies reflect a practical understanding of hydrology and environmental engineering long before formalized scientific methods existed. One of the most fascinating aspects of Aztec technology was their surveying and measurement system. Without compasses or modern levels, the Aztecs relied on natural markers, plumb lines, and sighting rods. By aligning stairways and terraces with sunrise, sunset, and mountain peaks, they achieved remarkable astronomical precision. Ropes with knots at measured intervals allowed consistent repetition of dimensions across terraces, ensuring symmetry and alignment with ritual requirements. This combination of observation, experience, and practical tools effectively functioned as an early form of surveying technology. Transporting materials required additional innovation. Heavy basalt and andesite blocks were quarried miles from Tenochtitlan, then transported along canals using rafts or canoes. Overland, workers employed lubricated pathways, rolling logs, and pulleys. Coordinated human effort, synchronized with rhythm and sometimes ritual chants, allowed massive stones to move with precision and minimal accident. This integration of human coordination and simple mechanical advantage is a hallmark of Aztec ingenuity. The organization of labor itself was technological in a social sense. Crews were divided into teams, each specializing in quarrying, hauling, shaping, plastering, or painting. Foremen supervised coordination, ensuring timing, rhythm, and technique. This hierarchical structure allowed thousands of workers to operate in synchrony, moving materials and assembling terraces with remarkable efficiency. The Aztecs understood that human labor, when organized scientifically and ritually, became a technological force in itself. Scaffolding and temporary construction supports were another critical technological aspect. Wooden beams and poles formed scaffolds around terraces and stairways, allowing workers to access higher levels safely. Earth ramps provided inclined planes for dragging heavy stones upward. These temporary structures were removed or buried as construction advanced, demonstrating a flexible and adaptive approach to building that maximized efficiency while minimizing risk. Painting and decoration involved another layer of technology. Pigments were ground from minerals, plants, and insects, then mixed with binders like tree sap or honey to create durable paints. Brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers allowed precise application to murals and altars. This technology was not merely artistic, it preserved symbols, conveyed religious messages, and reinforced structural and spatial hierarchies. Color itself became a functional technology, shaping perception and ritual experience. The Aztecs also demonstrated understanding of force distribution and structural mechanics. The step pyramid design, with its wide terraces and narrowing tiers, distributed weight efficiently across foundations. Terrace edges were reinforced with harder stones, and stairways were integrated to manage both vertical and lateral forces. Foundations embedded with wooden stakes acted as shock absorbers, allowing the pyramids to withstand minor seismic activity. Every engineering decision was informed by careful observation of materials, loads, and environmental forces, a technological understanding encoded in practice rather than written formulas. Finally, ceremonial requirements influenced technology. Temples had to accommodate human movement, ritual objects, and sacrificial practices. Builders accounted for weight distribution, wear patterns, and accessibility, integrating ritual functionality into the very design. Every tool, from hammerstone to rope, and every technological method, from quarrying to plastering, was applied with awareness of spiritual and ceremonial consequences. Technology and religion were inseparable. In conclusion, the tools and technology of the Aztecs would demonstrate an extraordinary blend of simplicity, ingenuity, and precision. Obsidian blades, Hammerstones, wooden levers, pulleys, ropes, lime plaster, and even human coordination were leveraged to achieve architectural feats that continue to inspire awe. Every technique solved practical problems while reinforcing symbolic and ritual meaning. The Aztecs show us that technology is not merely mechanical, it is social, artistic, and spiritual, a holistic approach to solving the challenges of building in harmony with both environment and belief. The temples they built, from step pyramids to the Templo Mayor, are enduring monuments to how human ingenuity, simple tools, and deep understanding of materials and mechanics can create structures that defy time. Even without modern machinery, the Aztecs transformed stone, water, and labor into sacred spaces that reflected their cosmology, their social order, and their devotion. Their technological mastery was as much about observation, coordination, and adaptation as it was about tools themselves, making each temple a testament to the brilliance of human problem solving. The construction of Aztec temples was a marvel of material selection and craftsmanship, blending locally sourced resources with specialized techniques to create monumental structures capable of withstanding both time and nature. Every stone, plaster layer, and decorative element was chosen and treated with deliberate intent, reflecting both practical and symbolic considerations. Understanding the materials and methods used offers a window into the Aztecs' ingenuity and meticulous planning. At the core of many Aztec temples was Tezontle, a lightweight volcanic rock abundant in the Valley of Mexico. Tezontle was porous and relatively soft, which made it easier to quarry and shape compared to harder stones, but sufficiently strong to form the bulk of pyramidal cores. Its lightweight nature reduced stress on the unstable, marshy foundations of Tenochtitlan, allowing the construction of taller pyramids without the risk of sinking or collapse. The Aztecs skillfully layered Tezontle, compacting it with soil and rubble to form a stable, durable base for edges, stairways, and areas requiring durability. The Aztecs used harder volcanic rocks such as basalt and andesite. These stones provided resistance to wear and erosion, crucial for steps and ceremonial platforms frequently traversed by priests, warriors, and pilgrims. The choice of harder rock for visually prominent and high-stress areas reflects an understanding of load-bearing principles and the durability required for long-term ceremonial use. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, served multiple purposes. While it was too brittle for primary structural use, it was indispensable for fine carving, detailing altars, and creating ritual objects embedded in construction. Obsidian's sharpness allowed precise etching of symbols, serpent motifs, and sacred iconography, enhancing both the aesthetic and symbolic power of the temple. When polished and embedded in stone reliefs, obsidian caught sunlight, adding a dynamic visual quality that heightened the temple's ritual impact. Lime plaster, derived from heating limestone and mixing it with water, was another critical material. This plaster served several functions. It bonded stones, protected surfaces from erosion and water damage, and created a smooth canvas for murals and painted reliefs. Sometimes, organic additives like maguey sap or plant fibers were mixed into the plaster to improve adhesion and flexibility. Lime plaster not only reinforced structural integrity, but also allowed vivid colors to be applied, creating visual narratives visible across plazas and ceremonial spaces. The use of adobe and mud bricks complemented stonework, particularly in non-structural walls and interior platforms. These bricks, sun-dried and shaped from a mix of clay, sand, and straw, were lightweight, cost-effective, and thermally insulating. Adobe walls could be replaced or repaired relatively easily, an important consideration for structures exposed to both weather and heavy ritual use. Sourcing these materials was a logistical challenge. Stones were quarried from mountains and volcanic deposits surrounding the Valley of Mexico, sometimes miles from the construction site. The Aztecs used human-powered transport systems, including sleds, rollers, and rafts on canals, to move massive blocks. Soil, sand, and lime were transported in baskets and woven containers. Every material's journey required careful coordination, reflecting an understanding of project management long before formalized engineering techniques existed. Construction techniques were layered and iterative, designed for both stability and ceremonial continuity. The core of a pyramid was built using a combination of horizontal and rubble, compacted to create a dense but flexible mass. Terraces were then added sequentially, each smaller than the one below, producing the distinctive stepped profile. Edges and stairways were carefully aligned and reinforced with harder stones, ensuring that ceremonial traffic and environmental stress would not compromise stability. Each layer was tested and adjusted, demonstrating a remarkable empirical understanding of weight distribution and structural mechanics. The Aztecs also employed interlocking stone techniques. Stones were shaped to fit snugly against one another without the need for mortar in some areas, increasing stability and durability. In other sections, lime mortar filled gaps, binding stones together and preventing water infiltration. This combination of dry fitting and mortar use optimized both structural integrity and construction efficiency. Decorative elements were integrated into the construction process rather than applied afterward. Murals, reliefs, and painted symbols were often executed directly on freshly laid plaster, ensuring long-term adhesion and durability. Serpent motifs, jaguar designs, and geometric patterns were strategically placed to correspond with stairways, altars, and ceremonial platforms, embedding symbolic meaning into the structural fabric itself. The temple became simultaneously functional, artistic, and sacred. Ritual deposits and offerings were often embedded during construction. Cavities within terraces or cores contained ceramic figurines, obsidian blades, jade beads, and small sculptures. These were believed to spiritually stabilize the temple and honor the gods during every phase of construction. The practice reflects an integration of material, engineering, and religious thinking, where structural and spiritual reinforcement occurred simultaneously. Water management was incorporated directly into the materials and techniques. Terraces were angled to allow rainwater to drain naturally, preventing pooling and erosion. Porous horizontal and compacted soil absorbed excess water, while canals and ditches diverted flow away from critical foundations. Even the lime plaster coating contributed to waterproofing, creating a protective layer against environmental stressors. The stairs themselves were a triumph of material and technique. Each step had to support human traffic, ceremonial objects, and sometimes sacrificial materials. Stones were selected for hardness and shaped to precise dimensions, while stair widths were calculated to allow coordinated processions. Edges were often beveled or reinforced to prevent chipping, ensuring long-term usability. Steps were both functional and symbolic, a pathway to the divine meticulously crafted for both stability and ritual meaning. In areas requiring special ritual prominence, such as summit shrines or altars, decorative stones and colored pigments were embedded into the masonry. Red, blue, and black colors were derived from mineral and plant sources, carefully ground and mixed with binders. The pigments were applied to fresh plaster, ensuring adherence and longevity. Symbolic motifs, eagles, serpents, and celestial patterns were integrated into the very structure of the temple, making architecture inseparable from art and ritual. Finally, construction techniques reflected incremental and adaptive planning. Temples were often rebuilt in successive layers, each new iteration reinforcing or expanding the previous one. This approach allowed for corrections in alignment, adaptation to ritual changes, and enhancement of structural stability. Every new layer integrated old material, ensuring continuity of sacred space while meeting evolving ceremonial and urban needs. In conclusion, the Aztec materials and construction techniques reveal a civilization that combined practical engineering, aesthetic vision, and spiritual purpose. Stone, obsidian, plaster, and adobe were carefully chosen, quarried, and assembled with an understanding of weight, durability, and symbolism. Techniques like layered terracing, interlocking stones, embedded offerings, and water management reflected both technical skill and cultural worldview. Each temple was a living integration of material, labor, ritual, and meaning, a structure designed to endure both physically and spiritually. The brilliance of Aztec construction lies not only in what they built, but in how they built it. Every material, technique, and method was deliberate, reflecting a civilization that understood the intimate connection between earth, labor, and the divine. Through these techniques, they created temples that were not merely functional or monumental. They were cosmic instruments, ceremonial stages, and enduring symbols of human ingenuity and devotion. Constructing Aztec temples, particularly monumental step pyramids like the Templo Mayor, was a Herculean task, demanding not only technical skill, but also the coordination of vast numbers of workers. The labor force was the engine behind the Aztec architectural marvels, and understanding their organization, roles, and methods provides insight into how the Aztecs transformed raw materials into sacred, enduring structures. The workforce was highly organized, reflecting both social hierarchy and practical necessity. At the top were the supervisors, often called kalpixke, who coordinated teams of laborers, tracked progress, and ensured adherence to plans and ritual requirements. These foremen were experienced in construction techniques, familiar with the properties of materials, and trained in ritual protocol, enabling them to balance the technical and spiritual demands of temple building. Beneath the supervisors were specialized crews, each responsible for a particular aspect of construction. Quarry workers extracted volcanic stone, basalt, and andesite from distant mountains. Using obsidian and hammerstones, they shaped raw materials into blocks of specific dimensions. Transport crews then moved these blocks along canals, causeways, and temporary pathways using sleds, rollers, and rafts. Masons and carpenters prepared terraces, built scaffolding, and shaped intricate stone reliefs for altars and stairways. Each crew functioned as part of a coordinated system, ensuring that materials flowed efficiently from quarry to construction site. Laborers themselves were drawn from a combination of sources. Some were common citizens, fulfilling communal obligations, known as Kalpali labor, contributing time and effort to projects that served the entire city. Others were specialized craftsmen, trained in stone cutting, plaster application, or painting, whose skills were crucial for precision and durability. Warriors and priests occasionally participated, especially during ceremonial phases, integrating ritual observance into the physical labor of construction. Coordination and timing were critical. Moving massive stones without modern machinery required careful orchestration. Teams often worked in synchronized rhythm, guided by chants, drum beats, or visual signals from supervisors. These rhythmic methods ensured that workers pulled sleds or lifted stones in unison, maximizing efficiency and reducing the risk of accidents. The combination of coordination and sheer human effort turned simple tools into highly effective mechanical systems. The Aztecs also integrated labor into their social and religious systems, making construction a communal and spiritual activity. Temple building was not merely work, it was a sacred duty. Contributing labor was considered an act of devotion, a way to honor the gods and maintain cosmic balance. Workers often participated in rituals before and during construction, offering food, incense, or small figurines to sanctify the building process. In this way, labor itself was a ritual, reinforcing the spiritual significance of the temple even before it was completed. Hierarchy extended to ceremonial roles within labor. Certain crews were responsible for ritual deposits, embedding offerings such as obsidian blades, jade beads, or figurines within terraces and cores. These workers needed both technical skill to place objects securely and ritual knowledge to ensure correct placement according to sacred tradition. Their work physically and spiritually reinforced the temple, merging craftsmanship with devotion. Training and skill development were essential. Apprentices learned under master craftsmen, gaining expertise in stone carving, masonry, plastering, and painting. This knowledge transfer ensured that complex techniques such as interlocking stones, lime plaster application, and decorative carving could be executed consistently across multiple construction phases. Even unskilled laborers were instructed in safe lifting techniques, movement coordination, and basic quarrying tasks, creating an efficient, adaptable workforce capable of large-scale temple construction. Motivation and management were also sophisticated. The Aztecs used a combination of social obligation, spiritual duty, and material incentive. Contributing labor to temples enhanced social standing within the Kalpuli and earned recognition from leaders. Workers were often provided with food, clothing, and ceremonial participation As part of their compensation, the integration of communal pride, spiritual merit, and practical reward created a motivated workforce capable of sustained, coordinated effort over months and years. The scale of labor required was immense. Building a temple like the Templo Mayor required hundreds and sometimes thousands of laborers working simultaneously. Quarrying alone demanded long distance transport of massive stones. Constructing terraces and stairways required continuous effort to compact fill, lay stones, and apply plaster. Decorative and ritual elements added complexity, requiring artisans to work carefully alongside general laborers. Coordination, hierarchy, and communication were essential to prevent bottlenecks and maintain structural and ritual accuracy. Labor extended beyond construction to maintenance and reconstruction. Temples were periodically rebuilt in layers, and workers had to carefully remove old materials, reinforce foundations, and integrate new terraces without compromising structural integrity. This cyclical process required knowledge of previous layers, precision in measurement, and adherence to ritual protocols, ensuring that labor contributed both to the physical stability and spiritual continuity of the temple. Ritual elements also influenced labor practices. Certain phases of construction were marked by ceremonies, and laborers participated in dances, offerings, or chanting. Processions of workers, moving stones or materials, were sometimes accompanied by ritual observances, symbolically linking the act of labor to the maintenance of cosmic order. Even the physical exertion of lifting and moving stones was imbued with sacred significance, transforming labor into both practical and spiritual contribution. Weather and environmental conditions added additional challenges. Workers contended with heat, seasonal rains, and the marshy terrain of Tenochtitlan. Techniques such as working in shifts, using temporary pathways, and coordinating water management reflected adaptive labor practices that minimized delays and protected both people and materials. The combination of planning, skill, and communal effort allowed construction to proceed despite environmental obstacles. In essence, the Aztec workforce functioned as a complex, coordinated system, integrating labor, ritual, and technology. Workers were not simply tools, they were participants in a process that combined engineering, art, and spirituality. Their effort ensured that temples were structurally sound, symbolically rich, and ritually potent. Each laborer contributed to a larger narrative, turning human energy into sacred architecture. Ultimately, the role of labor in Aztec temple construction highlights the interdependence of human skill, organization, and belief. Temples were not built by individual genius alone, but through the coordinated efforts of a community working toward shared spiritual and civic goals. Labor itself became a medium for devotion, a tangible expression of cosmology, and a vehicle for cultural continuity. By understanding the labor system, we gain insight into how the Aztecs translated vision into reality, transforming natural materials into monumental structures that integrated engineering, ritual, and artistry. The temples stand today not only as architectural achievements, but as enduring testaments to the power of human collaboration, skill, and devotion. Aztec temples were meticulously aligned with celestial events, reflecting the civilization's sophisticated understanding of astronomy. The orientation of stairways, terraces, and shrines often corresponded with solstices, equinoxes, and solar zeniths. This alignment ensured that rituals performed at specific times of year resonated with cosmic cycles, reinforcing the connection between human activity and the divine. The Templo Mayor, for example, was aligned with the rising and setting sun on key dates, allowing light to illuminate altars or murals in precise ways during festivals. These alignments were not accidental. They required careful observation of the horizon, tracking of the sun, and measurement of angles, demonstrating a blend of practical engineering and ritual intention. Temples functioned as calendar instruments, with terraces and stairways marking temporal divisions. Festivals for Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were timed to seasonal shifts, such as the onset of the rainy season or agricultural planting periods. Rituals synchronized with celestial phenomena helped maintain agricultural success, warfare timing, and religious observance. Astronomical alignment also reinforced social cohesion. Public processions, sacrificial ceremonies, and observances of celestial events drew the community together, linking daily life to cosmic order. The temples were not passive structures, but active participants in timekeeping, education, and ritual. Through their precise alignment and integration with the calendar, Aztec temples transformed architecture into a tool for measuring, predicting, and celebrating the cycles of both heaven and earth. Aztec temples were visually rich, decorated with murals, reliefs, and carvings that conveyed mythology, cosmology, and social hierarchy. Serpents, jaguars, eagles, and water symbols were not merely decorative. They represented divine attributes, warrior ideals, and natural forces, turning architecture into a storytelling medium. Colors were highly symbolic. Red signified blood, life, and war. Blue represented water, fertility, and rain. Black indicated death and night. White symbolized purity. These colors were applied to walls, stairways, and shrines using mineral and plant-based pigments mixed with organic binders for durability. Carvings often depicted gods, celestial phenomena, or ritual scenes. Reliefs of Huitzilopochtli highlighted war and sun motifs, while Tlaloc's iconography emphasized rain, fertility, and abundance. Murals on terraces could depict mythological narratives, ensuring that even those who could not read glyphs understood spiritual and cultural teachings. Decorative motifs also guided ritual behavior. Stairways, adorned with serpents or symbolic patterns, directed pilgrims' movement, reinforcing the spiritual journey of ascent. The integration of art, symbolism, and function made every temple not only a place of worship, but a visual encyclopedia of Aztec religion, society, and cosmology, engaging both mind and spirit. Aztec temple builders were acutely aware of their environmental context. Constructing on a marshy lakebed required adaptation to waterlogged soils, fluctuating lake levels, and seismic activity. Foundations used wooden stakes and compacted fill to provide stability, while terraces and drainage channels managed rainwater and runoff. Materials were locally sourced whenever possible. Tzontli, basalt, and obsidian came from nearby volcanic regions, reducing transport challenges. Lime plaster and organic additives enhanced durability while reflecting sustainable use of natural resources. Water management, including canals and dikes, ensured that temples could withstand flooding and allowed efficient transport of materials. The step pyramid design itself promoted long-term stability. Layered terraces distributed weight evenly, absorbed seismic stress, and allowed easy repair or expansion. Temple construction reflected a holistic understanding of geology, hydrology, and climate, merging practical engineering with environmental stewardship. By integrating local materials, observing natural forces, and designing adaptive structures, the Aztecs created temples that were durable, resilient, and harmonious with their environment, demonstrating an early form of sustainable architecture that balanced human ambition with ecological awareness. Aztec temples left a profound legacy, influencing both contemporary Mesoamerican societies and modern understanding of pre-Columbian architecture. Their step pyramids inspired later ceremonial structures, reinforcing principles of symmetry, alignment, and symbolic decoration. The combination of engineering, artistry, and ritual function set a benchmark for monumental architecture. European observers, post-conquest, noted the scale, precision, and spiritual integration of Aztec temples, which informed colonial urban planning and the placement of churches atop temple ruins. Archaeological studies reveal that the Aztec approach to construction, layered terraces, foundation stabilization, and material selection, remains a subject of engineering and architectural admiration. The aesthetic motifs, dual shrines, and symbolic alignment continue to inspire contemporary art, education, and cultural heritage projects. Ultimately, the Aztec temples are more than historical structures. They are enduring symbols of cultural ingenuity, spiritual depth, and architectural mastery, reminding the world that human creativity, labor, and devotion can produce structures that resonate across centuries, both physically and symbolically. Aztec temples were more than static monuments. They were centers of movement, procession, and communal experience. Pilgrims and worshippers approached the temple via ceremonial avenues, crossing plazas and canals in a journey that mirrored spiritual ascent. The processions were highly organized, reflecting social hierarchy, ritual timing, and cosmic symbolism. Participants often wore ritual attire, including feathered headdresses, painted bodies, and jewelry symbolizing gods or celestial phenomena. Music, drums, and conch shells accompanied their movement, creating a rhythmic and immersive experience that engaged both senses and spirit. Processions were timed with festivals, solstices, and specific calendar dates, ensuring alignment with sacred cycles. Stairways and terraces guided the movement, reinforcing a symbolic journey toward the divine. Pilgrims ascended step by step, passing murals and carvings that taught myths and illustrated the power of the gods. Each ascent was an act of devotion, physically manifesting the spiritual progression inherent in Aztec cosmology. Sacrificial ceremonies and offerings were often the culmination of these processions. The presence of thousands of worshippers amplified both the ritual significance and social cohesion of the temple precinct. Through structured movement, visual cues, and ceremonial participation, the temple transformed urban space into living ritual theaters, linking human action, divine presence, and cosmic order in a single, immersive experience. Temples were the heart of Aztec cities, not isolated monuments. The Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan was surrounded by plazas, markets, administrative buildings, and residential zones, reflecting the integration of spiritual, civic, and economic life. Streets and canals were arranged to facilitate access, processions, and visibility of the temple from multiple points. The temple's prominence reinforced political authority. The emperor, priests, and military leaders were associated with the temple, legitimizing their power through ritual and visibility. Social organization and urban planning were deeply intertwined with the temple's layout, making sacred architecture a framework for governance. Market activity, crafts, and festivals centered on the temple precinct, blending daily life with spiritual observance. Citizens were constantly reminded of cosmic and social order, with the temple serving as both a spiritual anchor and a civic reference point. Architecture, ritual, and urban life merged seamlessly in Aztec society, demonstrating the holistic role of temples in structuring both belief and behavior. Aztec temples were not static. They evolved through successive construction phases. The Templo Mayor, for example, underwent at least 7 major reconstructions, each expansion raising terraces, enlarging shrines, and embedding ritual offerings. These phases reflect practical adaptation, symbolic renewal, and architectural innovation. Older layers were often buried beneath new terraces, preserving sacred spaces while allowing the temple to grow. Each phase incorporated lessons from previous construction, improving foundation stability, water management, and alignment. The layering also held spiritual significance, honoring past generations and maintaining cosmic continuity. Reconstruction was a ritual as well as architectural process. Offerings, ceremonial deposits, and blessings were integrated into each new layer, ensuring that renovation reinforced both structural and spiritual integrity. The cyclical nature of construction reflects the Aztec worldview. Growth, renewal, and devotion were intertwined in every brick, step, and altar. Beyond religion, Aztec temples were powerful political symbols. Their height, visibility, and central placement emphasized imperial authority and divine sanction. The emperor's association with Huitzilopochtli reinforced the idea that rulers were intermediaries between gods and citizens. Military victory, tribute, and civic order were celebrated at temples, demonstrating that political, religious, and military power were inseparable. Public rituals and sacrifices reinforced obedience and social cohesion, while monumental scale impressed both citizens and visiting delegations. The temple's design communicated a clear message: cosmic order, social hierarchy, and divine authority were inseparable. The integration of architecture, ritual, and governance made temples central to maintaining both spiritual balance and political stability, illustrating how Aztec society fused devotion and power in every stone and terrace. Now, with a smile on your face, you will have a good understanding of how the ancient Aztecs built their temples, their sacred pyramids of faith and stone. Rest easy, knowing that the same human spirit that lifted those stones still lives within us today. Good night, dear friend. See you next time.